Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of what if Deku's predicted death was prevented by All Might. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku knew that Kaken would burn one of his hero journals that day. That was why he copied the most recent one, filled out just enough pages for Kaken to flip through, snort in disgust, and blow it to pieces in front of him. Izuku knew how to show just enough despair to sell the act, and he knew that Kaken and his other friends would watch him fish the charred book out of the school's koi pond. Izuku also knew not to take his usual way home, instead taking a detour through the busier part of town around the quiet underpass he liked. Part of him wanted to linger and observe, to see why he wasn't taking that route today, but he didn't want to be late. Izuku knew that trying to tell anyone that he, Izuku Midoriya, had a quirk, and that quirk was the ability to see his own future up to and including his death, would only result in a painful migraine that threatened to blot out everything he could see. Living with the taunts and harassment wasn't nearly so bad when he could see it all coming, like bracing before getting punched in the face. It wasn't a future he could see, but a gut feeling, a pit of dread in his stomach that kept him from even telling his mother about his ability. There was only one future for him, and it hadn't changed since he first saw it the morning after he was diagnosed quirkless, though he had tried to fight it when he was younger. Izuku knew that, at 4:05 p.m., shortly after class that Friday, a villain with a slime quirk would ambush Kaken in an alleyway near his favorite arcade. Izuku knew that he would arrive just in time to shove Kaken aside. Izuku knew that he would be smothered to death as the villain stole his body. He knew that the morning before walking to school that day would be the last time he told his mother he loved her. He knew he would never live to be a hero, but at least he could die a hero. And after that point, Izuku only saw darkness. So, when Izuku was seconds away from his self-appointed death, vision blurring, brain screaming from lack of oxygen, the acrid taste of the villain burning his mouth, ribs groaning under the internal pressure of the villain shoving itself inside of him, he was surprised when a precise, well-placed punch to the gut made him spew up gallons of slime villain. Izuku took sweet, delicious gulps of air, and looked up hazily at his savior. All Might, tall, gleaming, in the flesh, perfectly silhouetted by the setting sun, the symbol of peace himself, All Might. Tears ran down Izuku's cheeks at the sight of him. "Are you all right, young man?" his hero asked. Izuku tried to speak, but all that came out of his mouth was a rasping wheeze. All Might's smile faltered a touch, a movement so imperceptible that only years of observing the man's every public movement gave Izuku the ability to see it. "Don't worry, take deep breaths. You're safe now." All Might waved over paramedics in white uniforms. "These fine people will take care of you." As the paramedics helped him onto a stretcher, Izuku reached out, grazing the fabric on All Might's arm. He tried calling his name, but he could only cough. "What is it, young man?" All Might's eyes went to the charred, soggy book poking out from his bag. "Oh, of course. I have a pen on me somewhere." The ink ran a little bit on the damp page, but Izuku didn't care. He had All Might's signature. Distracted as he was, Izuku missed his chance to ask his hero how he changed the future as the doors of the ambulance slammed shut. An oxygen mask was strapped over Izuku's face. As his heart rate ebbed and his breathing slowed, he felt a new future creep into his consciousness, filling the void he had sensed earlier. He saw a kindly doctor run X-rays and MRIs, scanning his lungs and intestinal tract for signs of internal bleeding, verifying that his ribs weren't broken, checking for signs of dead brain tissue. He saw his mom, tears pouring down her face and snot dripping from her nose, sobbing into his shirt as she thanked God and All Might for saving her son. He saw that Kaken wouldn't be there. He saw that he'd be released from the hospital that night, and they'd get Katsuden, even though his mom would grimace as she emptied out her wallet. To his relief, the night went exactly as predicted, comfortably full, and still a bit sore from the attack. Izuku sat in bed as the new future trickled into his brain. He laughed as the brilliance of the universe's cosmic joke, played at his expense, came into focus in his mind. He wasn't mad. A single day as a UA Hero Course student was worth the admission price of aching muscles and popped blisters. He saw himself cleaning a beach, bones popping and muscles burning as he pulled a refrigerator up a set of stairs, running with a tire under each arm, breaking apart a rusted oven with swings of a sledgehammer, loading and unloading garbage into a pickup truck, looking out at a sunrise over the shimmering water, gorgeous white sand exposed out from under the mountain of trash, newfound muscles stretching as the wind caressed them. By the end of that summer, he had calloused hands, a clean beach, and killer six-pack abs. He knew what those muscles were for. He had applied to UA, thinking at the time he'd never live to see the front doors. That his pre-death application was the closest he could hope to becoming a hero. Seeing them was just as impressive the second time. The written test eclipsed anything he had ever seen in middle school, but he knew how to answer for a passing score. He never thought he would get to hear Present Mike in person. Despite knowing every detail of the entrance exam, he drank in every word of the pro hero's explanation, blissfully unfiltered by the limitations of audio equipment. He knew he would ordinarily never stand a chance against other heroes to be in a free-for-all against killer robots. But his quirk showed him the improbable path forward. He ordered pruning shears, a delicate piece of cutting equipment just long and thin enough to slip past the robot's outer armor. He made a makeshift riot shield from an old Lexan guard on the beach, just heavy enough to block the robot's rubber bullets. When the entrants gathered outside Battle Center B, Izuku sprinted for the doors and threw them open while everyone else was milling about. He heard shouts of "Hey, that's cheating," as he left them behind. But from the observation tower, Present Mike shouted back, "Cheating. There's no starting signal for hero work, you just get to it. Now move." Between the head start and the jostling at the doors, Izuku had plenty of time to run ahead. He saw which path to take to run into the most robots, where and when to hold up his shield, and how to angle his pruning shears to slip past the armor and snip their main power cable like a bomb defusal squad. The other applicants quickly overtook him, but even then, he found more points taking out robots they hadn't noticed or hadn't quite finished off. By the time the zero-pointer arrived, Izuku had 32 points. He knew that it wouldn't be enough on its own. With a girl trapped under rubble within 20 feet of him, Izuku knew that all he had to do was dig her out and drag her to safety to get another 56 rescue points. He knew that his mother would grasp him with shaking arms and cry tears of joy into his shoulder when he told her he had made it. He knew Kakin would be livid to the point of exploding like a foul-mouthed firecracker that quirkless, pathetic Deku dared to score higher than him. He knew the other students, hero course and general studies alike, would give him disapproving looks, whisper about how he cheated, and even continue the same harassment he had endured in middle school, albeit constrained by the teacher's vigilance and low tolerance for bullying. They would gloat about how quickly he had fallen. What Izuku didn't know was the faculty's reactions as they watched his progress through the battle center, settled into theater seating. With a couple dozen screens arranged in front of them, the principal and 6 members of the faculty watched the entrance exam unfold from every possible perspective. Each teacher had a remote and their own screen, allowing them to rewind and rewatch video feed from different cameras. Battle Arena B drew the attention of many teachers, in no small part because Nezu had spread word that the one quirkless applicant would be competing there. "Why did you allow his requests?" Shota asked as he watched Izuku pull the pruning shears out of his pants. Sementos squinted at the screen and asked, "Is that a piece of plastic he's holding?" Nezu smiled and brought out Izuku's requisition forms. Izuku requested that he be allowed to bring a pair of pruning shears and a homemade riot shield. His request was approved, since he claimed his quirk required them to properly fight. "But he doesn't have a quirk," Ectoplasm pointed out. "Which is what makes it so clever. I can't prove his quirk doesn't require those items to begin with if I can't prove what his quirk does." Shota scowled. "That's just a loophole, and you know it." Nezu gave the teacher a shit-eating hamster dog bear grin. "I suppose it is. Then why?" "I was curious." Shota waited, but Nezu said nothing else. "That's it. He asked for the exact 2 items I would have asked for, being in his shoes and knowing exactly what the test would be. Of course I'm curious. What does that mean?" "I have a feeling we're about to find out." They watched as Izuku bolted for the doors and raced towards the nearest robot. Izuku held the plastic guard in front of him, deflecting the rubber bullets upward. The pruning shears darted forward, sliding through a chink in the 2-pointer's armor and snipping a single wire. As Izuku's point tally hit the double digits, Shota leaned forward, entranced by the skill, or lack thereof, on display. The boy's toned body suggested arduous exercise, and his movements allowed him to dodge every attack. But there was a lack of grace to his steps, an imbalance, struggling to keep his footing during one lunge, nearly falling over when he made a sharp turn that screamed of inexperience. Shota wasn't the only hero glued to Izuku's screen. The other pro heroes let out startled comments as the quirkless nobody passed most of his peers with a gardening tool and a miniature plastic door. "I wonder who trained him," Midnight muttered. "He's good." "I don't know," Vlad King said. "There's something weird about how he's fighting. I can't put my finger on it." All Might leaned closer and said, "I feel like I've seen him somewhere." "Well, Nezu," Shota asked, "what do you think?" The principal hummed tunelessly and took a sip of tea. "I'm stumped." The other teachers turned towards him in surprise. "You, stumped?" Shota asked. "He isn't taking the optimal path. Theoretically, had he gone east instead of west, he could have had 45 points by now. Then again, the 0-pointer's west as well." Nezu chuckled and pressed the red button. "I wonder if he knows about the rescue points." Shota watched Izuku carefully. There was no surprise in the kid's face, no startled jump, not even a reflexive flinch as the 0-pointer demolished a 4-story building with its fist. A girl, Achako, if he remembered right, was trapped under falling rubble. Izuku had been running towards her before the first brick even hit the ground, and he didn't even change course as he ran up to her and dug her out. Wow, he didn't even hesitate, Cementos whispered. That kid's got my 10, Vlad King said as he raised his point card. Midnight, ectoplasm, and Cementos followed suit. Shota hesitated, his hand on one of the lower numbers, looking between his coworkers and the boy on screen. Something the matter? Nezu asked. Before Shota could answer, All Might said, I don't know. My gut's telling me there's something not quite right about Izuku, like there's something missing. Really? Blood King asked. He stopped hunting robots to help her out. I think that's exactly what we're looking for. I think it's his expression. I don't know, I guess it's just a feeling. All Might sighed and put a 10 in the air. Shota looked down at his selection of numbers. Trusting his own gut, he held up a 6. Cementos laughed. Harsh as ever, Shota. I have a gut feeling as well, and unlike All Might, I trust it over the opinions of others. All Might looked abashed, but he didn't lower his number. Well, that still leaves him with 56 rescue points, Nezu said. With that alone, he'd pass with flying colors, but combined with the villain points, well, looks like he's at the top of the class. Ironic, don't you think? Midnight shook her head. That kid's something else. Quirkless, unremarkable school record, and he beat everyone else by a mile. Seems like he was too prepared, even if he knew what would be on the test. Ectoplasm pointed out, the fact remains that he was still able to defeat the villains without taking a scratch, and he went out of his way to save another student. He earned his spot. Mutters of agreement went across the room. After they had finished grading the other students, the faculty filed out of the observation room, either heading home or getting work done. As Nezu went back to his office, Shota trailed after him. He knew about the rescue points, Shota said when they were alone. Certainly, Nezu cheerfully replied. I'm curious to see how he'll do in your class. You're letting me have him. Of course, he'll benefit more from having you teach him, given his disadvantage. Shota scowled. And if I think he doesn't have what it takes? Nezu paused. Send him to Gen Ed. I'd like to keep an eye on him. Still haven't figured out how he did it. I only have theories at this point. I'll need your help in narrowing it down. They reached Nezu's office. The principal opened the door for Shota. He reluctantly accepted a cup of black tea and settled into the chair opposite Nezu. I think Izuku has a quirk. Shota stopped with the cup of tea halfway to his mouth. How is he not registered? He was diagnosed as quirkless at the age of 4. Doctors found the extra toe joint. It's a generally accepted sign of quirklessness, but it's mostly just a myth. Nezu had a mischievous twinkle in his eye as he said, the real question is why he hasn't told anyone about it. It's an advantage. Nobody can counter a quirk if they don't know what it is. Nezu shook his head. Quirkless kids in his age group stick out. Sad as it is, they're common targets for bullying and harassment, and depending on the school system, the teachers may overlook or even encourage that behavior. Shota's grip tightened on his cup. The mere mention of bullying made his blood boil, even years after his own troubled school life. Did Izuku go to such a school? Unfortunately, which brings me to my point. Exactly how much did Izuku value the secrecy of his quirk that he was willing to endure years of harassment, to the point of physical violence, death threats, vandalism, verbal harassment, and whatever else the minds of children can conceive? Either someone, or something, told him to keep his quirk a secret, or he thought no one would believe him even if he said anything, which I'm afraid is all too likely given the doctor's diagnosis. Shota let out a deep breath. So, what do you think Izuku's quirk is? Some form of precognition, like Night Eye. Shota felt the realization settle into place, like finding a corner piece of a jigsaw puzzle and seeing how everything else fit together. That's how he was able to dodge and block everything. Nezu smiled at him from behind his cup of tea. Fits nicely, doesn't it? When should we confront him about it? That's the problem. Nezu finished his cup and stared mournfully at the dregs. If we do decide to confront him about it, he will know well in advance, and he will either come up with a defense to prevent us from learning anything, or avoid the confrontation entirely, much like how he could avoid and disarm every robot the test threw at him. Then we can't give him time to dodge. I'm afraid he has all the time he needs. Nezu took a stack of papers out from his desk drawer. He sent in the request for the pruning shears and riot shield 3 weeks ago. If he knew he'd need them so far in advance, he likely knows and is already prepared for whatever we would do. Going off when he bought the shears, we can extend his range of precognition to 5 weeks. I have a feeling it may be even longer than that. Shota felt his hackles rise. 5 weeks. Night Eye doesn't go farther than a couple days. He can, but the visions lose clarity. Whether or not Izuku's purely hypothetical quirk has the same limitation remains to be seen. The emphasis on the hypothetical nature of Izuku's quirk reigned in Shota's excitement. We still need to prove he has the quirk. Correct. All we have is guesswork. I'd thought of several other explanations for how Izuku could have performed so well. The precognitive quirk is just the simplest. Then what should we do? Erase his quirk and see what happens. Shota considered the plan as he drank some tea. It had bite to it, but compared to his favored quadruple espresso, it may as well be warm milk. Won't he see that coming as well? Probably, but it's as good a first step as any. As long as we don't directly confront him, I don't think he'll slip away. Shota raised an eyebrow. You think he could escape your surveillance system? If his precognition is as powerful as I think it might be, probably. He threaded the needle perfectly on the entrance exam and achieved the highest possible score. In all probability, with his quirk, he could predict his way out of any net I could weave. You think he's dangerous? Nezu beamed at him. All our students are dangerous, Mr. Aizawa. It's our job to make sure they don't endanger innocent lives. He glanced at his watch and said, I have some reports to send out. Have a good night. Shota set his empty cup on the table and drew his capture scarf around his face. Keep a spot in Gen Ed open. I'm expelling one during orientation. Once the door was shut, Nezu brought out more files on Izuku, medical records since his birth, report cards and teacher's notes, the Midoriya family's tax forms and spending history, everything that could feed into his high spec. As each fact fit into the predictive model he had constructed in his mind, he felt Izuku's quirk take shape in the logical void the model diverted around, like an object hidden just below the river's surface that split the current. He suspected it was a boulder, but it could have been a log or a sunken boat, and without dredging up the foreign object, he would never know for sure what it would be. The mystery of it gave him an intoxicating thrill. As Nezu perused Izuku Midoriya's life history, he wondered what had brought the boy to the alleyway by a popular arcade at 4:05 p.m. one Friday afternoon. The morning Izuku packed his bags for his first day at UA felt surreal. His mother wept tears of joy as she rounded up his textbooks and school supplies, and as if the tears were contagious, he started crying with her. He felt guilty, knowing he would disappoint her on the first day, after they had splurged on Katsudon to celebrate. Worse still was the feeling of dread that had been building up in him since he had woken up that morning. His new future was murky beyond his imminent expulsion from the hero course, possibly a side effect from having the future reset on him, but he knew that UA would get attacked by villains at some point. And further beyond that, villainy would rise in the background of his new life. The news would cover villainy attacks on a daily basis. People would shun the streets out of fear of being the next victim. And the heroes would stretch themselves thin, fighting a losing battle to save a society tearing itself inside out. Izuku hoped it wouldn't take long to get back to normal, letting the goodbyes and tearful hugs drag out as long as he could. Izuku took the latest possible train to UA. Arriving late as he did, he only had to slip by a handful of students before making it to classroom 1A. Anyone that saw him was too busy making sure they weren't late to their own classes to bother him. The timing of his arrival couldn't have been better. Kaken and the guy with glasses that had called him out on mumbling to himself during Present Mike's explanation were in an argument over the merits of their respective middle schools. Uraraka made a beeline straight for Izuku, introduced herself, thanked him profusely for helping her during the exam and congratulating him on passing, which drew the attention of the entire class. Some students smiled at him, some studied him impassively, but most had sour frowns that promised hostility. Kaken was halfway out of his seat when their homeroom teacher cleared his throat. Everyone stared in shock at the bedraggled man in the yellow sleeping bag as he scooted his way over to the teacher's podium, stood up, and unzipped the sleeping bag like a moth emerging from its chrysalis, even having the benefit of knowing the teacher's face ahead of time. And knowing he had to be a pro-hero, Izuku's search through his hero journals and online forums had come up with nothing on him. That narrowed it down to the underground heroes, which had proven difficult to research given their tendency to avoid the spotlight. 8 seconds. That's how much time you wasted before being quiet. Their teacher pulled a sack of uniforms out of his sleeping bag and tossed it on his desk. Put on your tracksuits and meet me outside. The other students gawked as Izuku stripped out of his clothes right there in the classroom, threw on a tracksuit, and sprinted out to the training grounds. His quirk gave him the benefit of knowing exactly where he would find his teacher. The teacher glanced at his watch as Izuku ran up to him. That's a new record. Heroes need to respond quickly to emergencies. Izuku answered. He knew the answer would get a subtle smile from his teacher, though it wouldn't stop the inevitable outcome of the quirk assessment. Kaken had made it seconds after him, the shirt of his tracksuit on backwards, winded from trying to beat Izuku outside. Spiky red hair and guy with tail weren't far behind, followed by a large clump of guys, one of whom was carrying a short kid with bulbous hair under one muscled arm, holding him easily despite the smaller boy's furious attempts to head back inside the school. The girls made it outside 2 minutes later, most giving purple hair disapproving scowls. 1 minute and 36 seconds, their teacher said. That's the time of the first student to arrive. 5 minutes and 35 seconds. That's how long it took all of you to arrive. One of the girls stepped forward. You expect us to get changed in front of that creep? She asked, pointing at the shorter student. The teacher gave the offending kid a stern frown, but he said to the class, 48 seconds. That's the average time it takes for a mugger to assault their target and make their escape. Depending on their quirk and the surrounding environment, you might not even have half that time. A girl with jacks sticking out of her earlobes stepped forward. She couldn't quite meet the teacher's eyes, still asking us to change in front of the boys. I'm not asking you to go that far. From now on, I expect you all to get changed in your respective locker rooms. With another glare at the bulbous hair boy, he added, I will not tolerate any form of sexual harassment in my classroom, and should I receive complaints, I will expel you. Is that clear? His stern tone compelled nods out of the whole class. Glasses held a hand high in the air and asked, May I speak, sir? The teacher sighed and said, Go ahead. Aren't we supposed to be at orientation right now? That's what the syllabus says we're doing today. An illogical waste of time. I have 3 years to teach you how to be heroes, and I'm not going to waste a single second on something so frivolous as introductions. Do it on your own time. I see. Then what are we doing out here? I'm glad you asked, Ada. The teacher tossed Kakin a baseball. You had to do fitness tests in middle school, correct? This time, you'll be using your quirks. Once you know where you start, you know where you can improve. So, go ahead and give it a try. Kakin's explosion-powered throw went 750 meters, to the amazement of the crowd. The students grew excited. When the pink-skinned girl gushed about how fun it was going to be, the teacher frowned. Izuku braced for what was about to come. Looks fun, huh? You think this is just a game? The teacher's insidious grin chilled the whole class, Izuku included. How about this? Whoever comes in last place across all 8 tests will be expelled. At first, the class stared at their teacher in shock. Gradually, heads turned towards Izuku. A few people grinned to themselves, no doubt imagining the same result Izuku already knew was coming. Expelled on the first day. A kid with yellow hair asked, Isn't that a bit much? This is UA. The teachers here are given free rein to teach how they see fit. The way I see it, it's better to have you expelled than killed by some 2-bit villain. He gestured at the nearby track and said, We'll start with sprints. Get moving. Izuku's work over the summer had paid off, for in each event, he had set a new personal record. Despite the progress, months of pushing himself couldn't compete against the years of rigorous training the other students had. He came dead last on the sprints and hovered in the bottom 5 for everything else, while everyone had at least one test they excelled in, from using acid to slide across the 50 meters dash to asking a bird to carry the baseball. Even students without beneficial quirks, such as the invisible girl, outclassed Izuku with pure physical conditioning. By the last event, the ball toss, it became evident to the whole class that Izuku wouldn't make the cut. Ochako and the others with acid and hardening quirks cheered him on as he stepped into the circle, but the rest heaved sighs of relief. Meanwhile, the teacher watched him, impassive, no doubt having already decided to expel the quirkless failure. Izuku buried his rising anger and shame, resolving not to let himself cry. He knew he wouldn't, not when he had seen this coming before he had even started. As Izuku raised his arm, he realized that he couldn't see himself throwing the ball clearly. Everything up to that point had been crystal clear. Everything after the toss hazy, like a dream half remembered as he went for a glass of water. Gritting his teeth, Izuku wound back and threw the ball with everything he had. Black. The repository of future knowledge went dark, as if someone had yanked a television's cord out from the socket. Izuku froze mid-throw, the ball flying limply from his fingertips to land a measly 10 meters away. Deprived of the knowledge his quirk offered. He couldn't be sure, but he could have sworn it was supposed to be a 50-meter toss. For once in his life, he had no idea what to do. Terror set in. He felt the world spiraling out from under him. His breathing quickened. His heart thumped against his ribcage like a trapped animal. Sight and sound were muffled until the present moment threatened to slip away like his future. Izuku could feel the eyes on him. Judging, questioning, mocking, pitying. He had to do something. Say something. He turned towards his teacher. His hair and scarf hovered around him, revealing glowing red eyes and a pair of yellow goggles. The hours spent on internet forums came back to him, and in a moment of clarity, he had figured out what had happened to him. Izuku stammered wildly as he said, You're a racerhead. Mr. Aizawa's eyes widened with surprise. But he didn't blink. How do you know that name? As the teacher grew suspicious, Izuku felt his brain melting. Izuku cursed the fact that, out of anything that could have possibly come out of his mouth that moment, he had to have picked the worst possible thing to say. Now a racerhead had to know he had a quirk he had hidden from the quirk registry, an illegally unregistered quirk that he had used to cheat his way into UA. Izuku took a deep breath and clenched his hands. Eraserhead couldn't keep his eyes open forever, but until he blinked, Izuku had to salvage the situation. Somehow, he made himself make eye contact with the teacher, though the stammer stayed in his voice and his thoughts remained in disarray. Sorry, sir, I was trying to figure it out throughout class today. I knew you had to be a pro hero of some kind, but I didn't have any idea who you were. I figured you were an underground hero, though I didn't know for sure which one, because there's not a lot of info out there on underground heroes. That's kind of the point. You're rambling, the teacher cut in. Don't waste time. Izuku felt himself blush. Sorry, bad habit. Anyways, I figured it out mid-throw, and I, kinda got surprised. He could feel the raw skepticism in his teacher's expression as he raised a single eyebrow. You just figured it out. Right now. It's the goggles, Izuku said, pointing to the eyewear hanging around Eraserhead's neck. They're to keep villains from knowing where you're looking at any given moment, so they don't know whose quirk you are erasing. Izuku wondered if it was wise to mention Mr. Aizawa's quirk. Whether or not it would make him look more suspicious if he mentioned what that quirk is, or hope that his teacher will think he didn't realize Eraserhead has a quirk erasing gaze. Since it's what the hero's most well known for, Izuku decided to include it. The teacher held his gaze for what felt like an eternity. Izuku felt himself wavering before the teacher's cold, calculating expression. I see, Mr. Aizawa said. He closed his eyes. Izuku felt the future come rushing back in, like a river that broke its dam, and nearly wept with relief. Mr. Aizawa tossed him another baseball. Startled, Izuku fumbled the catch. Since I would like an accurate baseline of your physical capabilities, Eraserhead said, and I would like to think you can throw a ball more than 10 meters, you may try again. Don't waste any more time. There were a few snickers from the crowd as Izuku wound up another pitch. This time, Izuku got the 50 meters he had previously predicted, a personal best, but still at the bottom of the class. As the class gathered around Mr. Aizawa, expectantly waiting for the test results, Izuku braced himself for his impending expulsion. His vision of the future rushed forward, giving him vertigo as he tried to make sense of the information overload. Eraserhead displayed the results, showing Izuku in dead last, as expected. All right, let's head back to class. Those weren't the words Izuku remembered. Raising a shaky hand, Izuku asked, excuse me, Mr. Aizawa, what about me? Didn't you hear what I just said? Head back to class. Kaken's hands popped with miniature explosions as he glared at the teacher. What, you're not going to expel the worthless shrimp? Nope, I was lying about the expulsion. The class erupted in an uproar. Izuku, for his part, was too stunned to say a word. What had happened to the outcome he had seen before his quirk was erased? Now that he felt calmer, he could see the future take shape, a future where he stayed in the hero course, despite his failure. What had changed? How? Why? Silence, all of you. Eraserhead's words cut the chatter like a knife. It was a logical ruse to draw out your full potential. Anyone who can't operate under pressure doesn't have what it takes to be a hero. Now let's go. Izuku could feel himself breaking on the inside. As his future crept outward, he was 5 again, rolling on the floor as 10 years of bullying and a death by suffocation played out while the All Might video played on loop above him. 2 fingers on his left hand snapped, and he could feel shards of bone grinding against one another as he moved his hand. Izuku choked on his scream, desperate to break away from the crowd before the pain got worse. He took the out his quirk showed him. I need to use the restroom. Is that okay? Eraserhead studied him carefully, with an emotion on his face that Izuku couldn't read. Make it quick. We have work to do. Yes, sir. Izuku sprinted to the nearest restroom, locked the stall, and collapsed onto the toilet seat. Sobs broke out of him, and tears ran down his face as the future spread outward. A dull echo of the pain from breaking fingers lingered in his left hand, and his right itched from a burn. As his future crept outward, exhaustion deadened his muscles, making him too weak to move. Each day of his new future weakened him, until he felt a bone-deep exhaustion that made him want to close his eyes. The panic he had held back with everything he had came rushing in full force, a feeling of helplessness and confusion from having his entire future ripped out from under him like a tablecloth. He couldn't imagine how people could live like that, not knowing what their every action would entail, how to speak, how to act, where to walk, every minute detail laid out for him in a picture-perfect script. The anger and fear of the present grappled with the exhaustion of the future, sending his heart into an arrhythmic patter. The future had changed. Again, he still wasn't sure what had happened the first time, but this time, his quirk had been erased. For just a moment, he couldn't see what he was supposed to do. He had messed up. He had given into panic. And now, Eraserhead knew he had a quirk Izuku wasn't supposed to show him, and somehow, it had changed what was supposed to happen. Anger simmered inside Izuku. For the first time in his life, he felt that he could hate a hero. Even Endeavor, for all his sour attitude and rudeness, could be respected for his tireless efforts to apprehend villains. But his teacher changed his mind about how much Izuku was worth because he had a quirk. He was supposed to expel him. Bottom of the class, quirkless, weak loser he was. The only thing that could have changed his mind was his quirk. It explained the sudden shift in his future perfectly. As he huddled into a ball on the toilet, chest bursting with anger and hysteria, his new death came to him. Swirling black void, villains on a ship, a nightmarish monster with unfocused eyes, a hand reaching for him from darkness, the classmates and heroes gathered at the center plaza, safe, the villains ready to retreat. Izuku felt his skull ripping itself apart. Each fleck of skin, flesh, and bone that turned to dust drove another lance of pain through his head. Izuku stuffed a hand in his mouth, stifling the scream that tore itself from his throat. After what felt like an eternity, the pain stopped. Izuku picked himself up off the bathroom floor with shaking arms, breathing deeply. Tooth marks bit painfully into his hand, almost drawing blood, but the pain was distant, numbed by his having felt it already. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to prepare before villains will attack his school and try to kill his classmates and his teacher. He didn't have time to cry. He washed his face in the sink and let his hair hang low to hide his puffy, red eyes. On his way back to class, he took a detour to the library and checked out a book on sign language. Izuku hoped that, this time, that the future wouldn't change on him. Once Shouta had the rest of his students back in their seats, he told them, "I need to speak with the principal for a bit. Pick your class representatives before I get back." "But we just met each other," Momo said. "We don't even know each other's names." "Then fix that." As he left, he heard one student ask, did he even say when he'd be back? Shouta didn't trouble himself to give them a time limit. If they couldn't handle being left alone, he'd just expel some of them. The teacher's lounge was empty. Half a pot of coffee was left in the machine, lukewarm and gritty. Shouta drank it anyways. The influx of caffeine did nothing for the sheer emotional exhaustion he felt at that moment. He sank into a chair and rested his head in his hands, thinking about the expression Izuku had as he froze. His quirk twisted a knife in his chest. He had seen countless reactions to quirk erasure over the years, anger, shock, even fear, but never had he seen someone look so lost, so terrified, so close to having a full-blown panic attack that he had readied his capture scarf to keep him from collapsing. As a teacher, he knew he had to instill respect, sometimes even fear, in his students. Despite what the media portrayed, the world was not a kind place to heroes, and any that weren't ready when they left his care would have their throats slit within a month, their deaths buried underneath the latest news report on All Might. The thought of seeing one of his former students left in some garbage bin in an alley kept him awake some nights. He had seen traumatized students, some even in his own class, shaken by a close encounter with a villain or a class exercise gone wrong. But never in all his years teaching at UA had he ever personally traumatized one of his students. It made him feel sick inside. Worse was the visible, Herculean effort Izuku had shown forcing that terror back, mustering every scrap of courage he had to meet Eraserhead's quirk-erasing gaze head-on. Shouta had never been so simultaneously horrified and awestruck to see someone so young and so small stand tall in the face of debilitating fear. After seeing that kind of courage, how could he expel him? After forcing some drops into his eyes, Shouta went to Nezu's office. The principal already had a cup of tea waiting for him. "You just had to do it outside, didn't you?" Nezu asked. "Do you realize I don't have good camera angles out there?" "You were right. Midoriya has a quirk." "You're sure about that?" Midoriya reacted the instant I erased his quirk, Shouta said. He tried not to think about the slow, dawning horror that twisted Izuku's features as the ball flopped to the ground. Nezu tusked, "Well, there goes my theory." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. If Midoriya could foresee the future, like Night Eye, wouldn't he have known that you would erase his quirk?" Shouta washed the coffee grit off his tongue with a mouthful of tea as he pondered Nezu's point. "So, if his quirk isn't foresight, what is it?" "Hard to say. Either it's a foresight quirk with mechanics not immediately obvious, or his quirk is something else entirely. Maybe an intelligence quirk. I really hope it's an intelligence quirk. I've been looking for someone to play Go with. Chess is too boring." Nezu sighed and sipped his tea. "Either way, we'll need to do more tests." "No." Nezu paused. "Is something the matter?" Whatever I did terrified Izuku so badly he looked ready to pass out. Shouta closed his eyes and took a deep breath, calming himself so he wouldn't start shouting. "I don't think I can do that again. Unfortunate, but I trust your judgment." Nezu tapped the edge of his teacup. Terrified. Is his quirk always active, or was he using it at that precise moment for some reason? What was he doing? Throwing a baseball. He was winding up for the pitch when I used my quirk. Made him fumble the throw. Smart. Not sure yet, but probably the former. Hard to say given the lack of data. Shouta shifted in his seat and adjusted his scarf. "I think Midoriya needs counseling." "We can't. It would single him out, as there's nothing obviously wrong with him, not to mention we don't even know what his quirk is. We can't help him if we don't even know why he needs help. He was almost certainly bullied. Unless Midoriya comes forward with that information himself, we don't have proof. I can't just assign someone therapy because I suspect something's wrong. Or I'd have half the school seeing Hound Dog on a weekly basis." Shouta gave the principal a skeptical look. "Half? Really?" Nezu sighed and sipped his tea. Todoroki Shoto, domestic abuse. Bakugo Katsuki, dangerously egocentric. Takoyami fears his own quirk. Yaoyorozu has low self-confidence. Kota has anxiety issues. And the less I say about mine, the better. And that's before we get into what hero training will put them through. Nezu set his cup down and stared thoughtfully at his tea. If you're that worried about Midoriya, I'll arrange for counseling with the first compelling excuse I can find. And who knows, maybe he'll open up to Hound Dog. Izuku was back in his seat when Shouta returned from Nezu's office. The red eyes and hunched expression as he read his book didn't go unnoticed by the teacher, and he immediately regretted not pressing Nezu harder on the counseling. Guilt wormed its way into his heart, and he found himself wondering what he could do to make it up to him. If he couldn't help him overcome his past traumas, maybe he could help him get physically stronger. I take it you've decided, he asked the class. Ida rose his hand. Yaoruzu-san and I were chosen to represent the class. We will do our best, sir. Good. Yamada-sensei will be here in a bit for English. I'll see you all at the end of the day. Shouta didn't normally bother to check in on his students at the end of the day. Doing so was an irrational waste of time. Today, however, he needed a private word with a student. After Shouta dismissed his students, Midoriya lingered behind, perhaps already aware of what he was planning to ask. Bakugo lingered as well, glowering at Midoriya with an expression Shouta recognized all too well. But after a glance back at the teacher, Bakugo evidently decided to leave without making a scene. Once they were alone, Midoriya closed his book. Shouta caught the title before he shoved it in his bag and wondered how sign language had caught his interest. From the barcode on the cover, it was from UA's library. Shouta mentally shook himself, resolving to investigate it some other time, and tried to put on a friendly expression for Midoriya. Friendly expressions were not his forte. A word, if you don't mind. Midoriya glanced at him with smoldering eyes and a clenched jaw. Aizawa felt his heart twist at the sudden anger. But it was only logical that the boy hated him after what he had put him through. Shouta took a form from his desk and handed it to Midoriya. If you're serious about becoming a hero, you'll need to work on your physical conditioning. I'm willing to coach you after school hours. You'll need parent approval and, thank you, Aizawa-sensei. His words were blunt and cold, betraying controlled anger beneath them. I'll have my mom sign it tonight. Nodding, Shouta said, we'll start tomorrow, then. Meet me at Gym Gamma after class. Bring whatever weapons you're comfortable using. As Izuku left his classroom with his backpack clutched in his arms, an old habit to keep him from being grabbed by its straps, Shouta wondered if he could ever earn the boy's forgiveness. Izuku stared at the green cloth in his hands. It wasn't supposed to matter what hero costume he chose. He was supposed to get expelled on the first day and spend his miserable student life in general studies. But there he was, holding the hero costume he had designed when he was 6, getting ready to fight against real hero students. It looked and felt like the childish fantasy it was, impractical and gaudy, arrogant, even, given how much inspiration it drew from All Might's aesthetic. Just thinking about wearing it, the goofy plastic grin on the face mask, the oversized gloves, and worst of all, those green flaps of plastic sticking up like All Might's hair, made him want to rip it to pieces. Despite all that, even though he already knew what would replace that outfit, it felt right to indulge in his childhood fantasy for the upcoming fight. Once everyone had their costumes on, they went to Ground Beta. The grounds had been built in imitation of Musutafu's streets, complete with multi-story business complexes, cars parked in the streets, and working power lines crisscrossing the infrastructure. From a vantage point inside Ground Beta, the class could see the target building from multiple camera angles along with the giant window overlooking the miniature city. The building for their training exercise towered over its neighbors, offering multiple points of entry on the lower floors, which had more spacious layouts and forced students to fight in narrow corridors higher up. Elevator shafts, stairwells, emergency stairways, power lines, even the rugged concrete facade itself all offered different avenues of reaching the target. Anyone defending the bomb would have to decide between covering entry points at the risk of letting someone sneak past them or hunkering down by the bomb and losing the advantage of holding a perimeter. Drawing lots from a coffee mug with the barcode still on the bottom, the students sorted themselves into pairs. Koda looked less than thrilled standing next to Izuku. I'd hate to be the group going up against Bakugo and Todoroki, Kaminari said, shivering as 1A's two powerhouses held up strips of paper with J's at the end. This seems quite arbitrary, Ida pointed out. Are you sure this is the best way to assess our abilities? Izuku said. Heroes often have to work with whichever hero that happens to be on the scene with them. Making it random like this tests our adaptability and ability to coordinate with others. All Might looked relieved that Izuku had made the counterpoint. Why, yes, exactly, young Midoriya, well said. He cleared his throat. Now, let's get the matches started. First up, we'll have Team C as the villains. Your job will be to guard the bomb hidden in the target building. You win by either holding out for 15 minutes or capturing both heroes with this capture tape. Izuku offered his partner a reassuring smile. Koda looked ready to shrink into his shoes as they walked forward. His classmates commented on how unlucky they were, and he even caught a stray whisper of someone hoping to go up against them. And the heroes, who are tasked with either incapacitating the villain team or securing the bomb before time runs out, will be Team J. Kaken smiled like Christmas had come early. Todoroki was staring at them as though they were a pile of laundry. Kota quivered and hid behind Izuku's back. Hushed whispers made a tumultuous background noise as All Might struggled to calm them down. "Come on, that's hardly fair," Uraraka said. All Might looked shaken by the one-sided matchup. "Well, maybe we should." "Should what?" Kaken roared. "Go easy on the quirkless Deku. If he wants to be a hero so fucking badly, then he needs to be ready to have his ass handed to him." "Watch your language," Ada said. "That's disrespectful to your classmate." "Like I give a shit." "Kaken's right," Izuku said, staring at his friend. "If I want to be a hero, I can't go easy on myself. People will be counting on me. And if I'm not strong enough to save them, what good am I?" All Might looked back and forth between the two teams. "Are you really sure about this? There's no shame in fighting someone closer to your skill level." Kota looked ready to beg for a new matchup. For his own part, Izuku felt sick to his stomach. Knowing what was about to happen, he couldn't help but want to curl up on the floor, beg All Might to put him in general studies, and go back to being the school's punching bag. But he couldn't. He was supposed to protect his classmates. Izuku smiled and said, "I'm sure." "Well, if you say so." All Might handed them 2 rolls of capture tape and wireless earbuds. "You have 15 minutes to prepare before the heroes arrive. The timer on the bomb will start counting down once you enter the building. After that, the heroes have 15 minutes to reach the bomb before time runs out." Kota fidgeted in silence as they took the elevator to the top floor. The bomb was at the far end of a wide-open room, empty save for a few concrete pillars supporting the roof and a pile of cardboard boxes in one corner. Izuku went to the circuit breaker next to the elevator and turned it off. "Your quirk allows you to control animals, right? Are there any around?" Kota shook his head. After some hesitation, he made gestures in sign language indicating he was mute. Izuku signed back that he was still learning, but he could understand him. A brief flash of happiness crossed Kota's features, but it vanished when the reality of their situation came back to him. "What about insects?" Izuku asked with hand signals. "Can you control them?" Kota cringed, shaking his head and hiding his face. Izuku put a reassuring hand on his shoulder and spoke softly to him. "Hey, everything's going to be okay. We can do this. We can win, but I'm going to need your help." Kota stared at him in disbelief, tears welling in the corners of his eyes. With shaking hands, he signed, "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I know Bakugo. He's going to run ahead and come straight for me. I can take him out, but I need to know which way he'll take. Can you find that out through some insects? There's bound to be a few around here." After some hesitation, Kota signed that he was too terrified of bugs to talk to them. Izuku knelt next to him and signed back that it was okay to be afraid, that he would be right there and make sure everything was all right. Looking into Izuku's calm, smiling face, Kota swallowed and went whispering for flies. Within minutes, he had a small swarm gathered in one corner of the room. Izuku helped him relay instructions, scattering flies across the floors and sending some outside to watch the perimeter. A few others served as runners, relaying messages back to Kota. The few mosquitoes he had found were on standby, hovering a safe distance away from them. All the while, Izuku kept a hand on his shoulder, telling him that they weren't going to hurt them. Everything was okay, he was doing a great job. Kota trembled throughout the process, but he didn't stop controlling the insects. All Might warned them over the intercom that their 15 minutes were up. As they went downstairs, Kota got updates from his network of flies and signed Kaken's location to Izuku. Without having to consult their map, Izuku led them to the hallway where he knew he'd fight Kaken. The whole structure, walls and floor alike, were lined with metal to keep the whole building from falling apart. The hallway was too narrow for Kaken to maneuver easily with his explosions. While they waited, Izuku signed his plan to Kota. His partner looked ready to faint from panic, but after another reassuring smile, Kota hid himself behind a doorway. "Deku, where are you?" Kaken called, his voice echoing through the narrow hallway. Kota squeaked and shrank behind the doorway, but Izuku didn't twitch. He heard the footsteps coming closer, step by step, growing louder and louder as Kaken strolled through the building. Izuku kept his back to the entrance Kaken would take, knowing that his friend wouldn't resist the temptation to pounce when he wasn't looking. Izuku waited, hands limp at his sides, envisioning the moment Kaken will attack him. Die! Explosions from both palms boomed through the hallway, and the shockwave of them slapped against Izuku's back. As Kaken rocketed towards him, right arm cocked back for a punch, a manic grin on his face, Izuku waited, counting his heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. Izuku pivoted his right foot back and turned. Entrenched in his vision of the future as Izuku was, it felt as though his limbs moved of their own accord. He swung his left fist in a massive roundhouse, meeting Kaken's eyes for the brief instant before it connected. It felt like he was punching a truck. The shock from the impact numbed his whole arm as it was thrown back. Blood gushed out, spattering the floor and walls with red flecks and drenching Izuku's hand. Izuku felt spikes of pain from 2 of his fingers as Kaken's nose crumpled under the impact. Kaken's own fist, sparking with nitroglycerine explosions, clipped Izuku's ear, singing the fabric around his head. While Kaken's head flew back, the rest of his body flew forward, flipping him over as he fell. The back of his head hit the ground with a gut-wrenching thunk. Groaning, Kaken tried to stand. Izuku sat Kaken up against a wall, took the radio out of his ear, and pried the gauntlets off his hands. "Deku," Kaken said between gritted teeth. "What the hell? Sorry, Kaken. I'm going to need these." Izuku removed his own top and tucked the green tracksuit behind Kaken's head. He took Kaken's arm-length gloves and put on his equipment. The grenade-like gear strained his shoulders, but he didn't let himself slouch. He pulled on the oversized steel handles on the gauntlets, exposing the firing pins underneath, and cocked them back in place. "Kota, help me tie him up." Kota stared at the 2 of them, mouth moving silently as his hands shook violently, unable to form coherent signs. When Izuku smiled and said it was all right, Kota took a deep breath, knelt with Izuku, and wrapped Kaken's wrists. "Bastard," Kaken said. His voice was growing faint. "You aren't supposed to be here. Just a pebble." "I know," Izuku whispered, "but I have to do this." "Sorry, Kaken." Izuku gave Kota Kaken's extra grenades. The timid boy looked at them as though they'd explode any second. "We shouldn't need those," Izuku signed, "but we shouldn't leave Kaken with them." Into his radio, he asked All Might, "Can you send someone to get back Hugo-kun? I don't think he should stay here for the rest of the test. The medical bots are on their way." All Might said back to them, "Continue with the test. You haven't told Todoroki-san what happened, right?" "I haven't," All Might confirmed. "That would interfere with the test." They left Kaken sitting up against a wall, too weak and delirious to chase after them. The walk downstairs was silent, with Kota occasionally signing to Izuku that Todoroki was still waiting outside. When they made it to the ground level, Izuku and Kota took positions on either side of the door. Izuku signed his plan. Though Kota initially looked frightened, he looked at the gauntlets Izuku wore and nodded resolutely. Careful not to lean out too far, Izuku threw open the door. He waved at Todoroki and motioned for him to come inside. As Todoroki approached the door, Kota signed that he was coming and whispered to the mosquito he had found. Just before Todoroki made it inside, the mosquito bit him on the cheek. Todoroki swatted at the insect. At that moment of distraction, Izuku leapt out from behind the doorway. Todoroki's eyes widened as Izuku's fist headed towards his left side. Fire involuntarily sprang up, darting at Izuku. He let Kaken's flame-resistant gloves take the heat and scored a clean hit on Todoroki's chest. Reeling back, Todoroki slid across a sheet of ice and raised a giant wall in front of him. Izuku cocked the left gauntlet and pulled the pin. A deafening explosion erupted before him, flinging Izuku's arm back. The blast ripped apart Todoroki's wall, spraying bits of ice everywhere. While Todoroki was blinded, Izuku readied the second pin. He sprinted through the glittering haze of ice crystals, right arm pointing back, left hand gripping the pin by his 3 unbroken fingers. Rocket punch. He pulled the pin. Izuku twisted with the force of the explosion, driving his right arm into Todoroki's stomach with enough force to knock his feet out from under him. Todoroki rolled to a stop on the ground, wheezing and clutching his stomach. While he was still down, Izuku pulled out his capture tape and, ignoring the pain from his broken fingers, tied a knot around Todoroki's arms. It took 5 seconds before All Might called out, "Both members of Team C have been captured. The villains win." 2 more medical robots came for Todoroki, but he waved them away. Rolling to his knees, Todoroki tried to stand. Before he could fall, Izuku wrapped an arm under his right shoulder. "Let me help you up," Izuku said. "Are you feeling okay?" "I'll be fine," Todoroki said with a rasping voice. "Just winded." Izuku made some clumsy signs with his right hand. Kota ran out from his hiding place inside the building and took Todoroki's other shoulder. The robots followed along as they walked back to the observation deck. "So, you can use fire too?" Izuku asked. Todoroki's face hardened. "That was an accident. It won't happen again." "Is that why you have that scar?" Izuku winced. "Sorry, forget I asked." Izuku knew it wasn't the moment to have the conversation Todoroki needed. Not with Kota on the other shoulder and the other students watching them from the observation deck. Gritting his teeth against the throbbing pain from his broken fingers and the burns on both hands, Izuku prepared himself to greet his classmates with a smile. Ajiro Mashiro didn't like the look in Midoriya's eyes as the green-haired youth calmly stared down Bakugo, who had the feral grin of a maniacal serial killer, and agreed to fight him. On paper, the quirkless student that had placed at bottom of their class in yesterday's assessment paired with Kota, whose quirk needed animals that were absent from the training ground, was a guaranteed loss against the 2 most powerful quirks in the class. But thinking back to the fact that Midoriya had nearly set a record on the entrance exam and watching how he stared down his opponents without so much as a nervous twitch made Mashiro wonder if the quirkless kid had a plan to turn the tables on them. "Dude, this is going to be brutal," Kaminari whispered. "Do you think they'll be okay?" All Might Sensei won't let it go too far, Shoji pointed out. But it still doesn't feel right. Well, he asked for it, Gyro said. He'll only have himself to blame when he gets blown to pieces. Or turned into a popsicle, Sato added. Well, I think he can do it. Their pink-skinned classmate waved her arms at the camera. You can do it, Midoriya-kun. Show them what you got. Uraraka's face reddened as she added her own cheer. Yeah, go Midoriya-san. Minda glowered at the girls from his seat. No fair, he grumbled. He has his own cheerleading squad. Once the villains made it to the top floor, Midoriya started talking to Koda. The cameras caught their conversation, for all the good it did when they started speaking in sign language. Wait, are they using hand signals? Kirishima asked. That's so cool. Looks like sign language. Actually, Yaoyorozu chimed in. It's actually a really smart idea. By using sign language, they can communicate without letting the enemy know or giving away their position. I wish I knew what they were talking about, Kiro. I too wish I had learned sign language. I admire their diligence. Learning such a useful skill before coming to school shows excellent foresight. I don't think it'll work for me, Hagakure said, waving her hands. No one will be able to see my hands. You're wearing gloves, Kaminari said. We can see just fine. Oh, right. When All Might announced that the heroes could enter, Bakugo sprinted through the doors, leaving Todoroki behind, shouting for Todoroki not to get in his way. After watching his partner leave, Todoroki made himself a chair of ice and sat in front of the doors. Doesn't seem like they're working together. Do they really have to? Either one could take both of them. Wait, they're leaving the bomb. Yaoyorozu asked. What if Bakugo goes around them? Seems like a reckless plan on their part. Mashurao looked at the villain's camera feed. Both Midoriya and Koda were heading downstairs. On the digital layout of the building, with each student marked with a colored dot, he saw that they were both heading straight for Bakugo. I'm not sure I want to watch. I hope he doesn't get hurt too badly. It was over almost too quickly for Mashurao to process. Bakugo blasted himself across the hallway, pouncing like a panther towards Midoriya's back. In a fluid turn, Midoriya moved aside at the last possible second and raised his own fist directly in Bakugo's path. The sharp, meaty smack that came over the speakers, followed by the metallic thud of Bakugo's head hitting the floor, silenced the whole crowd. Mashurao felt his stomach heave, watching blood gush from Bakugo's broken nose. An unspoken question hung in the air, a collective wondering if the rest of the combat training will entail blood and broken bones, conveyed in slackened jaws, nervous sideways glances, and apprehensive stares at All Might. Once Midoriya helped Bakugo into a sitting position, the silence broke like a dam. Midoriya, that was so manly. I think I'm going to be sick. Dude, was that Bakugo's nose we heard? So flashy. I'm a bit jealous. How did he punch so hard? What a mad banquet of darkness. I'm actually kind of scared of Midoriya now, Siro said. Wait, Kaminari said. Bakugo's the one that blasted himself across a hallway shouting die. And you're scared of the quirkless kid? Well, yeah. He wasn't the one that had his nose broken with one punch. Okay, that's fair. Midoriya's punch bothered Onjiro. If Izuku's crooked fingers were any indication, he hadn't balled up his fingers correctly, a sure sign he had no idea how to throw a punch, yet his reaction was perfectly timed. Whirling when it was too late for Bakugo to change course, his fist aimed correctly without even looking, and his footing set wide enough to keep Bakugo's sheer momentum from knocking him over. Onjiro watched All Might, wondering what their teacher's reaction would be. For a fraction of a second, his ever-present smile faltered. Staring at one of his students bleeding out on the floor, he looked out of his depth. He flipped through his Teaching for Dummies book, fingers shaking as he turned each page. Looking back at the screens, Onjiro saw Midoriya take off his shirt. Cold horror gripped his chest as he saw the burn marks that covered Izuku's arms and back. But judging by the class's reactions, they had missed that detail. He's making sure Bakugo is comfortable, Ida said. Very commendable. And he's doing exactly what you're supposed to do for someone with a broken nose, Yaoyorozu said. Disarming him is also smart. Wait, he's putting on Bakugo's costume. Sato asked, Is that allowed? I don't see why not, Asui said. But does he even know how to use them? Midoriya, checking the pins on Bakugo's gauntlets, quickly answered that question. Onjiro could tell that Midoriya and Bakugo spoke to each other, but they were both speaking too quietly for the cameras to pick up. Midoriya's voice over the radio snapped All Might out of his shock, galvanized to action. All Might had the medical robots take a hidden service elevator to get Bakugo while Midoriya and Koda headed downstairs. Do you think he's going to beat Todoroki too? Shoji asked. No way, Minta said. He just got lucky with Bakugo. It doesn't look like Todoroki realizes what happened to Bakugo, Yaoyorozu said. Maybe they could ambush him, but it'll be nearly impossible to beat his quirk. Ambush was exactly what Midoriya had in mind. judging from how he and Koda set themselves up around the front doors. Todoroki was still sitting on his throne of ice, watching the building with an impassive expression and checking the time, while the villains exchanged a last set of hand signals. With a gauntleted hand, Midoriya opened the front doors and waved at Todoroki, motioning him to come inside. A collection of gasps rose from the students as Todoroki watched the waving hand. No way, he's not going to fall for that, is he? Todoroki stood, melting the chair with a wave of his hand, and went towards the door. Oh my god, he is. That has to be the stupidest, yet most incredible plan ever. Doesn't seem very manly though. What darkness lies beyond that door? Todoroki paused just before entering. At first, Ajiro thought he had noticed the trap, but it turned out a mosquito had bitten him. Midoriya chose that exact moment of distraction to spring the ambush. As Midoriya threw his punch, fire leapt up from Todoroki's left side, scorching the stolen gauntlets. Wait, he can do fire too? Gyro asked. How OP is his quirk? A wall of ice rose impossibly fast between Todoroki and Midoriya, but a single explosion turned it to dust. As Midoriya shouted the name of his improvised attack, a second explosion threw his fist into Todoroki's stomach. The whole fight was over so quickly it took 5 seconds for All Might to call Midoriya's win. Midoriya already has a super move, but that wasn't even his own gear. His brightness is almost as dazzling as mine. I call dibs. Ashido's shout brought the excited conversations to a screeching halt. Dibs? Kirishima asked. Dibs on what? Midoriya. Dibs. I'm calling it. Hagakure wrapped an arm around Ashido's shoulder. Ooh, you're going to ask him out? Yep, he's totally my type. Kirishima gave her an uneasy smile and a rock-hard thumbs up. Well, go get him, Mina-chan. Thanks, Ig-kun. Mashiro felt his heart go out to Kirishima. Judging by Ashido's easy smile and casual attitude, she had no idea he had a crush on her. Meanwhile, Minda was sobbing into his shirt and shaking with rage, muttering to himself about how unfair it was that the quirkless kid had better luck than he did. For him, Mashiro felt no sympathy. Midoriya and Koda each held one of Todoroki's shoulders as they entered the observation deck. After gently setting him in a chair, they stood next to All Might at the front of the class. Excellent job on the exercise. I'm impressed with the creativity and tenacity you have shown, Midoriya. Now, can anyone tell me why Todoroki and Bakugo lost? Ida's hand snapped into the air. They were completely lacking in teamwork. Bakugo charged into the building without a plan, while Todoroki waited outside, providing no support to his teammate. Had they stayed together, I don't believe Midoriya would have had a way to win against Todoroki's ice. Well said, Ida. It's important for heroes to work together and communicate in the field. People's lives depend on how well you can coordinate a rescue response and contain a villain. Now, does anyone have any suggestions on how Midoriya and Koda could improve? Silence greeted the question. Mashiro was tempted to point out Midoriya's broken fingers, but Yaoyorozu raised her hand. Staring directly at Midoriya, she said, it was reckless to leave the bomb undefended. Had you failed to intercept Bakugo, or if Todoroki had decided to enter the building by a different route, they would have easily taken the objective. Very true, Midoriya said coolly, meeting Yaoyorozu's stare. It's a good thing we knew exactly what Bakugo and Todoroki were doing. Yaoyorozu was taken aback. How? Midoriya glanced at his partner, and he made hand signs in response. Koda asked some flies to watch them both. We knew which stares Bakugo was taking, and we knew Todoroki was waiting outside. Midoriya smiled and added, we would have never won against them if it wasn't for Koda. Koda blushed and hid his face behind his hands. Midoriya turned back to Yaoyorozu and asked, do you have any other concerns? Yaoyorozu scowled for a fraction of a second before her face was back to its usual impassive, calm expression. Yes, you were excessively forceful against your classmates. One had to be carried off on a stretcher, and the other's lucky he doesn't have any broken ribs. That first explosion could have easily killed Todoroki. Furthermore, if this was a real combat scenario, Bakugo would not have been well enough to be left alone. To that last point, heroes can't always hover around an injured civilian. Sometimes, they have to leave someone for rescue later so they can apprehend a villain actively targeting other bystanders. I made sure Bakugo would be stable until backup arrived and left to deal with an uncontained threat. To the others, we're training to be heroes. Injuries happen. Villains aren't going to hold back. I don't want to hurt anyone, but if it's to protect others, I will. All Might hastily shoved his book in his back pocket and stepped between them. All right, we can discuss the specifics of this later. For now, we should send the next groups out there. Actually, can I go to the nurse's office? Midoriya asked, holding up his left hand. I broke 2 fingers. Ah, yes, of course. More surprised mutters and odd whispers came from the students as All Might's eyes darted across the room. Could you take Todoroki as well? We should have recovery girl check on him just in case. Sure. Todoroki-san, can you walk? Todoroki tried to stand, but he winced and fell back in the seat. Still hurts, he said in a rasping voice. Mashiro stood and offered Todoroki a hand. All Might Sensei, is it alright if I go with them? While All Might hesitated, Midoriya said, thanks, I appreciate it. All Might cleared his throat and added, yes, of course. Come straight back once you get there, alright. I don't want you missing out on this class. With Todoroki leaning on one shoulder as they walked through UA's empty halls, Mashiro wondered what he was trying to learn from Midoriya. Was he genuinely concerned about a classmate with way too many scars for a minor? Did he think Midoriya was hiding something from everyone? What questions could he even ask? All Mashiro knew was that he needed answers. Todoroki Shoto wasn't sure how to classify this new emotion he was feeling. There was a whole lot of abdominal pain, but that was probably the nitroglycerin-powered punch that Midoriya had rammed into his gut. He also felt lightheaded, which may or may not have had anything to do with the fact that he couldn't breathe anything deeper than a mouthful of air without prompting another bout of the aforementioned abdominal pain. Neither of those experiences were particularly new, as Endeavor was fond of going for gut punches to teach him to keep his guard up. Gut punches tended to leave fewer broken bones, and the bruises were easier to hide. The new feelings were more of a confused knot of anger, shame, and giddiness, as though a kitten had taken the neatly wound yarn balls of emotion lying in the dust-coated hamper in the forgotten corner of his mind and batted them across his head, leaving everything tangled together. Bearing that metaphor in mind, Shoto decided to spin the slow, arduous walk to Recovery Girl's office trying to untangle his emotions. The shame was simple enough. Shame he lost to the quirkless kid. Shame all it took was a pair of gloves and the wave of a hand to lure him right into a trap. Shame he let something so petty as a mosquito bite distract him at the worst possible moment. Though now he thought about it, that had to be Koda's doing. Shame he used Endeavor's fire, even though he had sworn not to. And there was the anger again. Not at Midoriya. Not at Bakugo either, no, at himself. The training exercise hadn't particularly mattered to him, so it didn't make sense for him to be angry he had lost, except for this nagging sense that he wasn't supposed to lose, not to someone so weak. How was he supposed to prove to Endeavor that he didn't need his fire if he couldn't even win with both powers? The giddiness came anytime he thought about Endeavor's reaction. Losing to someone near his level would have been enough for Endeavor to spend a month training him until his bones turned to jelly. Him losing to someone without a quirk might make Endeavor furious enough to burn himself to a crisp. Shoto wondered if it would be better to tell Endeavor himself, or wait for him to find out through whatever contacts he had at UA. Are you still feeling okay? Ajiro asked. We're almost there. Shoto looked over at the classmate carrying him by the shoulder. Nothing's broken. Bakugo was laid down in one of the beds. Dried, crusted blood was smeared across his face, and his nose was wrapped in thick gauze bandages. As Ajiro set Todoroki down at another bed, Recovery Girl came back in with a damp towel. Just how many kids is All Might going to send me today? She said as she pulled up Todoroki's shirt. Shoto winced as she prodded and poked at his gut, but the pain was mild enough to endure without making a sound. Nothing's broken, sweetie. Have a gummy, let that ice for 10 minutes, and head back to class. The purple gummy bear she handed him tasted like cough medicine. It left his chest with a tingling, energized sensation as it hit his stomach. Ajiro offered him an ice pack, but Shoto made his own ice. Recovery Girl examined Midoriya next. Gloves off, please. Ajiro had to help Midoriya with the right glove. As the skin-tight black fabric slid off, revealing a patchwork quilt of scars, Shoto felt his eyes widen. He followed the scars up Midoriya's shoulder, over to his back, and wondered how he hadn't noticed earlier. Thin lines, jagged scratches, and burn marks. So many burn marks, some the size of a thumbprint, some bigger than his hand, none quite as vivid and pronounced as Shoto's own scar, but eye-catching through their sheer quantity. The skin from his knuckles to his elbow was an angry shade of red, with the faint beginning of a blister forming on the back of his hand. Recovery Girl's eyes roamed across the scars before snapping back to the burn. Second degree, I think. I have some cream and painkillers for that. No point in wasting my quirk. It'll blister a bit, just leave it alone and it'll be fine. Bakugo's gloves must have helped. Endeavor's flames usually burn to the bone. Midoriya managed the other glove himself, though not without visible discomfort as he gently pried the glove off his hand. Two crooked fingers didn't quite bend with the rest of his hand. Recovery Girl tensed and puckered her lips. Midoriya's fingers twitched and straightened as the bones in them mended back together. 2 students with broken bones in 10 minutes. That has to be a record. I really ought to have a word with him. It was my fault, Midoriya said. Sorry about that. Learn from your mistakes. There's only so many times I can speed up your healing before you're too exhausted to move. I will, thanks. Midoriya set a hand on Bakugo's bed. How is he? Concussion, broken nose, nasty lump on the back of his head. Recovery Girl squeezed cum cream out of a tube and slathered it on Midoriya's burned hand. Let All Might know he'll be out for the rest of the day. Got it. Midoriya took the tube of burn cream Recovery Girl offered him and went to the door. As he was leaving, he turned around and asked, Hey Todoroki-san, want to get soba sometime? The only two words that initially registered in Shoto's mind were want and soba. Without thinking about it, he said, "Sure, how does 5 on Friday sound? I'll have training with Aizawa-sensei after class, but I can do it after that." The full extent of Midoriya's quest had finally percolated through Shoto's brain. Even then, knowing that Midoriya had just invited him to eat soba, he had no idea what the request entailed. No one had ever asked if he wanted to go anywhere before. Was it something friends did? Were they friends now? Shoto admitted to himself he didn't know anything about friendships, but he was pretty sure they didn't start with a punch to the stomach, or he and Endeavor would be friends 1,000 times over. Was it the scar? Did Midoriya still want to know the story behind his scar? Was Midoriya willing to share his own? Did he even want to know? His first impulse was to refuse, saying that he had training after school as well. As he thought about it, he realized it came with two benefits. One, he wouldn't have to go home until late in the evening, missing a day of Endeavor's training, and two, soba. His eyes wandered back to Midoriya's arms, then to Midoriya's face. Midoriya showed no sign of emotion. No anger, no happiness, no worry. It had been that way before and during the fight as well. 2 broken fingers, and not a trace of a grimace the entire time. It felt like he was looking in a mirror. "Sure, I can do that. Great, I'll get you my phone number later." Watching Midoriya leave, Shoto had given up on understanding his emotions. For now, he decided to sit back, let the ice numb his bruised stomach, and wonder if the soba would be chilled. With just the two of them in the hallways, Mashiro knew it was now or never, but he still didn't know what to ask. Going straight for the scars felt far too blunt, and odds were Midoriya would refuse to answer him. Given the fact Midoriya was quirkless, Mashiro had the uneasy feeling he had some idea of why he had gotten them anyways, which left his other question. As they approached ground beta, Mashiro took a deep breath, as if he were crouching into a forward stance. "How did you know when to turn around?" Midoriya stopped. Mashiro continued a few steps before reeling himself back. With a neutral expression that betrayed no hint of discomfort or confusion, Midoriya asked, "What do you mean?" "When Bakugo lunged at you," Mashiro said, "you turned at the perfect moment and had your fist in the perfect spot. I know you had Koda telling you where he was, but there's no way hand signals would give you that much information that quickly." Midoriya rummaged in his track pants pocket and took out a journal. The cover had the reflective sheen of a product fresh off the shelf, and on the front, in black marker, was written 1A. "I've known Kaken since we were kids," Midoriya said as he flipped through the journal's empty pages. His quirk, his temperament, fighting style, everything. "I made notes of everything I thought would be important." Midoriya handed him the journal. On one page was Bakugo's face, glaring at him through rough pencil lines and graphite shading. For a quick sketch, it captured Bakugo's sour, egocentric personality very well. A second sketch showed a full body portrait, though the limbs were left as single strokes of the pencil. The other page had a staggering analysis of Bakugo's strengths and weaknesses, in terms of his quirk, overall physical condition, and state of mind, so much crammed into tiny text that it made Mashiro's eyes hurt looking at it. "Your drawing's very good. It's just a rough sketch. I was waiting for our hero costumes before putting the finishing touches." Mashiro flipped to the next page. It was empty. As he was about to hand it back, curiosity got the better of him. The journal was labeled 1A, and Bakugo's entry was about 30 pages in. He flipped to the beginning and found Aoyama's roughly drawn face staring smugly back at him, with sparkles drawn in to capture his vanity. His notes were no less detailed, though a quick read showed it was more speculation than hard facts. Despite that, Midoriya had already noted Aoyama's inability to change the output of his quirk and speculated on using mirrors and lenses as support items. "They're in alphabetical order," Midoriya said. Mashiro, startled, closed the book and held it towards him. "Sorry, I shouldn't have looked." "No, it's fine. It'd be nice to see what someone else thinks of my analysis." Somewhat perturbed, Mashiro flipped until he found his own name. Midoriya had noted his excellent physical conditioning and correctly guessed that he had martial arts training. Reading further, Mashiro found the flaws in his fighting style, a lack of ranged options and the inability to combat more impressive strength augmentation quirks, along with suggestions of support items to correct both issues. "You think I should use Ebola? Excellent way to incapacitate fleeing villains," Midoriya said. "Non-lethal and low risk of injury, can be used to tie up villains, and in a pinch, it could serve as a close-range weapon. Makes use of your excellent physical conditioning and impressive throwing ability. With practice, your tail could throw them, surprising opponents that are focused on your arms. And the tonfo or eskrima sticks, for opponents with blades. You won't be able to dodge easily in crowds in close quarters, so having a way to block is important. A sturdy enough weapon can let you crack hardening quirks like Kirishima's, and these are less likely to kill as well. You've done this for the entire class. How did you get this much? Yesterday's test gave me a lot to work with. I'll add more as I see more of what everyone can do." Mashiro counted the empty pages, with as much detail as Midoriya could cram into a single page. He likely had enough space to last the entire year. Out of curiosity, Mashiro flipped forward, looking through the M's. Midoriya had a section of his own. His sketch was much more detailed, both the profile and full body, with colors penciled in. Midoriya's eyes stared out from behind a plastic visor, and his hair was left loose. The full body shot showed a different hero costume, a form-fitting tracksuit with muted green colors, fingerless gloves, a black belt with pouches, and padded shoes. Midoriya was no less thorough on his self-analysis, citing his quirklessness and highlighting his inferior physical conditioning, while stating his ability to analyze quirks and his research into hero work, along with the likelihood of being underestimated by his opponents, as his chief advantages. Towards the bottom, Midoriya had made a list of self-improvements he wished to make, improving his stamina, getting a ranged weapon, and learning martial arts. You even analyzed yourself? Mashiro asked. It's important to know where you start and what you can work on. Midoriya gave him a sad smile. I have a long way to go compared to everyone else. You beat Todoroki and Bakugo. I'd say you don't have much to worry about. A stunt like that only works once. If I want to stay in the hero course, I need to learn how to fight. With a wry smile, Midoriya added, without breaking fingers, preferably. Well, you could always ask one of the teachers, or you could try finding a dojo off campus. Come to think of it, didn't you say you'd be training with Aizawa-sensei that day? Actually, I was wondering if you'd be willing to show me some beginner moves. Eraserhead specializes in Wing Chun, for more defensive fighting if cornered, which I intend to learn, but I'd like to try Jiu-Jitsu. Why? I'm just another student. I doubt that green belt is just for show, Midoriya said, pointing at the belt over Mashiro's gi. It's fine if you don't want to. I just thought it would be a good way to get to know a classmate better. And get more notes for your journal, Mashiro added in a defensive tone. I'd be willing to show you what I write down. It's only fair. If I come up with anything else I think would help you, I'd be happy to share it as well. Mashiro still felt uncomfortable around Midoriya. Between his unexpressive face and affable demeanor, he couldn't tell what was going on in Midoriya's head. And judging by all the scars and his lack of a reaction to breaking fingers, he had to have been through some serious abuse. At the same time, he couldn't deny that Midoriya had been open and honest with him about his observations and seemed genuine in his wish to spend time together. In the end, the opportunity to observe more of his classmates' behavior, to assess how much of a danger Midoriya posed, swayed his decision. I suppose I could show you some basic stances, Mashiro said. Great. How does Seriat 5 sound? More training with Aizawa. You shouldn't overdo it. It's just basic stances, right? Shouldn't be too taxing. Mashiro mulled it over. While exercising too much could hurt Midoriya, he could keep the exercises light for a martial arts beginner. I suppose. Make sure he knows about it. I will. Swap phone numbers after class. Trying to collect the entire class contact information? Midoriya chuckled and said, my journal wouldn't be complete without it. Mashiro couldn't tell if he was joking or not. Once Midoriya returned to the classroom, Ashido Mina waved him over to the empty seat next to her, which had once been Kirishima's. Midoriya took the seat and brought out a journal. His eyes were glued to the screen as he made sketches on a page. Curious, Mina leaned over and saw Midoriya drawing the features of Kirishima's hero costume. When Kirishima and Sato clashed, the latter cracking Kirishima's hardened body with a sugar-powered punch, Midoriya made some quick side notes next to the drawing. Wow, you're really good, Mina said, keeping her voice low so All Might wouldn't hear. Thanks, Midoriya muttered back. I've been waiting for the hero costumes to finish my sketches. Mina leaned closer, letting her shoulder rub up against him. That's a lot of detail you're putting on the abs. You wouldn't happen to be into guys, would you? Mina's teasing statement got a couple strangled gasps out of Kaminari and Ida, but Midoriya didn't even flinch at the question. The drawings help me visualize how people use their quirk. More detail means I might see something I'd otherwise miss. Mina mentally cheered. Midoriya is confident, bold, and knows how to handle her banter. If he knew how to party, she'd call him her perfect match. She studied him closely, searching for clues on how to steer the conversation. He kept drawing, but she could see him glance her way every so often. What about me? Have you drawn me yet? Midoriya flipped towards the front of the journal. The sketch was still rough, but Mina stared in fascination at her bubbly, cheerful smile staring back at her. Ooh, I like it. Lowering her voice, she asked in a mock-serious tone. You didn't get a peek in the locker rooms for your sketches, did you? From the way Gyro's jacks twitched and the glare she sent at Midoriya, she had picked up on that question. Mina winced, hoping she didn't just get Midoriya in trouble, but he handled her question with impeccable poise. Who do you think I am, Minta? I'm working off memory from the quirk test yesterday. Gyro relaxed in her seat, and Mina let out the breath she had been holding. That has to be challenging, though, right? It is, but for the finer details, I'll ask for footage from today's lesson. They let us look at that. Of course, Midoriya gestured at the screens. Currently, Kirishima was stuck in Siro's tape, but Aoyama cut him free with his laser. The school website uploads videos of class activities like these so we can learn from our classmate. Wait, can anyone watch these? Shoji asked. 2 of his tentacles had sprouted ears, and a third held a mouth right next to Midoriya. Anyone with a school ID. Midoriya answered to one of the ears. If the videos go public, the school needs your permission first. All Might, finally noticing the conversation, cleared his throat and said, please hold your comments until the end of the combat exercise. We will discuss it together once they get back. As silence returned to the room, Mina stared sullenly at All Might's back. The conversation had gotten derailed. And now she had lost her chance to find out more about Midoriya's hobbies. Risking one last whisper, she asked, want to hang out sometime? Sure, swap numbers later. All Might turned back around, putting a prompt into their conversation, but once he had gone back to the screen and Midoriya was buried back in his journal, Mina pumped her fist. Her excitement was somewhat diminished when, after math class, she wasn't the only one waiting outside Ectoplasm's room. So, you swing both ways, Midoriya-chan? Mina asked with a mischievous smile. Todoroki gave her a bland, puzzled look, while Ajiro reddened visibly. Midoriya, unflappable as ever, simply said, I don't think so. Haven't really thought about it. Once they went their separate ways, Mina's phone got a text, suggesting Machai on Sunday. Mina immediately said yes and headed home with a bounce in her step. Power Loader was busy resigning himself to an extra 3 hours watching over his new problem student when a knock came at the support lab's doors. Midoriya, dismissed from extra training by Eraserhead on account of having burns and stamina drain from broken fingers, instead used his time after school to get his hands on new support equipment. Midoriya, right, something I can do for you? Power Loader asked in a bored tone. My hero costume got covered in blood during combat training today, Midoriya answered. Put in a request. Yours was pretty simple, so we should have something whipped up by tomorrow. Actually, I was hoping to make some adjustments. I have some material specs and color schemes I wanted to implement. I would also appreciate it if I could discuss possible support items with one of your students. Power Loader looked back nervously, where the one student that had refused to leave the premises was feverishly working on her next volatile experiment. Well, most of the students have gone home already, which means at least one is still here. Can I talk to them for a minute? Power Loader weighed his options. While he technically was supposed to let his students help heroes in training design their gear and only step in to make sure the new equipment wouldn't get students killed in the field, he felt tempted to spare the young, vulnerable-looking Midoriya the danger of approaching his problem student. Splitting the difference, Power Loader said, you could always come back tomorrow when there are more students around. You might find someone better suited to designing what you need. I'm sure we can work something out. I need new gear as soon as possible. Power Loader sighed and flung open the door. She's in the back. Watch your step around her. The jetpack she was designing today blew up half the lab. He was hoping that offhand comment would be enough to scare off Midoriya. But he didn't seem fazed in the slightest by the prospect of handling anything that could explode at any moment. Instead, he thanked Power Loader and went straight towards the sounds of welding torches and power sanders. Power Loader followed the kid, partly because he had nothing better to do, mostly to make sure he didn't have to file an incident report. As they approached Hatsume's workstation, the canister of compressed, flammable gases she was welding to a metal plate sprung a leak. She dove for cover, killing the heat on the welding torch, but a stray spark ignited the gas. With a deafening bang, the canister blew its top off. A clump of metal shrapnel the size of a fist sailed close enough to the Midoriya's head to ruffle his hair. Yet he didn't even flinch. Instead of welding the tanks onto the plate, you should make holders for the tanks, Midoriya said. That way, you can swap them out with fresh canisters. Hatsume looked up from her hiding spot under the workbench, her goggles zooming in and out as they focused on Midoriya's face. Hatsume, she said as she clambered onto her feet. Maybe later in the development cycle, Hatsume said. I wanted a proof of concept first. You're not going to get a proof of concept if it keeps blowing up on you. The student examined the framework of the jetpack, which still had smoke drifting off it. A jetpack's a great idea. Adds maneuverability to a hero's kit. There are a lot of heroes that could use something like this. Hatsume rushed forward and grabbed the student by the shoulders, all but crushing him with her chest as she brought him face to face. I know, right? Everyone was saying that grapnel hooks were more practical, but how boring is that? Plus, a grapnel hook wouldn't work in open spaces. Exactly. Plus, with a jetpack, a hero can do a flying headbutt. Imagine how awesome that would be. It would be awesome. The student took a journal out of his backpack and got a pencil ready. I need some kind of long-range weapon. And I was wondering if you could help me with that. You want to make babies with me? Hatsume asked excitedly. Power Loader inwardly groaned, ready to explain to the poor kid Hatsume's meaning. But the kid answered in a calm voice, I would appreciate it. Ooh, let me guess. Attack drones with boxing gloves? Imagine swarming your enemies with hordes of flying punching robots. I was thinking something handheld. A gun that fires a second gun. Imagine the trick shots you could do with that baby. Non-lethal. Rubber bullets. Ooh, that explode into sticky goo, snaring your target. Something that can help me grab things. Hatsum frowned. That kind of sounds like a grappling gun. She hummed to herself in frustration before shouting in delight and slamming her hand on the workbench. Give me 1 second. Hatsum returned with a 6-foot length of cable, some duct tape, and a wad of grip plastic. After taping everything together, she slapped the cord against the wall, letting the plastic end stick. An experimental tug had it clinging to the wall. Is it safe on people? Midoriya asked as he examined the adhesive material. In response, Hatsum peeled the prototype off the wall and flung it at Midoriya, catching him in the face. With some care, the plastic peeled off without leaving a mark. Any way we can get it to unstick remotely. Hatsum was long gone, scrambling for parts around the workshop. Could do something with an electrical current. Send a wire through the cable. Air pressure. Use the grappling guns as a base. I can have it ready by tomorrow. Great. Thank you, Hatsum-san. We can meet up right after class ends. Hatsum grunted in reply as she tore apart a stock grappling hook. Power loader, stunned by how well Midoriya had handled his most eccentric student, followed him numbly back to his office. I would discuss costume changes with you, right? Would you mind if we went over the new specs? Sure, kid. Power loader got himself a cup of coffee and resigned himself to a long night. Whatever you need. There were moments when Izuku hated his quirk. He hated raising his hand for every question in every class, giving perfect answers every time. He hated getting perfect scores on every quiz and worksheet, prompting the teachers to praise his academic excellence. He hated seeing Kaken's simmering anger and Yaoyorozu's crushed, defeated expression every time he outdid them both. They both competed with him to answer the most questions and score the highest on their first-day pop quizzes. But neither of them could compete with someone who knew the answers before the teacher had even handed out the papers. It had been like that for no small part of his childhood. He had always hated knowing that people will die or villains will escape and thinking that if he had made an anonymous call to a hero agency, none of that would have happened. He hated hiding his scratches and burns from his mom. Hated avoiding beaches and swimming pools. Hated wearing long-sleeve shirts even when it was hot outside. He hated wondering what kind of house they could have if he had used his quirk to win the lottery. How often they could have katsuden, how much more time his mom would have for him since she wouldn't have to work 2 jobs. Over the years, he had considered taking those paths, risking discovery of his quirk to get him and his mother better lives. But every time, the mere thought of changing what he saw gave him a headache, as though he was ramming his head against a brick wall. So, he kept his head down, kept his scars hidden, and tried not to look too closely at news of people dying. Of all those events, of all the pain and suffering he had endured, of all the squalor of their dingy 2-bedroom apartment, the instant ramen and bean soup, second-hand clothes and faulty AC units, of all the attention currently heaped on him, nothing made him more seriously consider pushing through that headache, finding any other possible future than what was about to transpire as he slipped into an alleyway just outside UA, after a training session with Aizawa on Thursday evening. With loud, angry footsteps at his heels, Bakugo Katsuki had fallen into Wonderland. It was the only explanation for how fucked up the world had become the moment he woke up in a hospital bed in Recovery Girl's office, with almost enough gauze plastered over his face to smother him in his sleep. The old hag had told him he had broken his nose and had gotten a concussion. That alone was impossible. He was Katsuki. Nothing could hurt him. He could take a long walk off a high-rise building and blast his way down without a bruise. If something flew at him, he could blast it out of the air. If anyone tried to hurt him, they'd fucking die. As if that wasn't fucked up enough. When he numbly asked how the hell he had wound up with a broken nose, the hag had slathered a metric fuck ton of putrid icing atop the shit cake. Fucking Deku had punched him. One punch from Deku, scrawny, pathetic, quirkless Deku, and he had a broken nose, a concussion, and the living daylights knocked out of him. Not possible. When he bolted upright, dizziness hit him like a truck. But he struggled through it, staggering to his feet through spite against the stupid world that had dared bring him low. With a gentle push of her cane, Recovery Girl knocked him back in bed, gave him a disgusting kiss on the forehead, and all but shoved one of her gummy bears down his throat, while strength returned to his numb body. He caught flashes of what had happened up until he had blacked out, going up against Deku, racing into the building, finding him with his back turned. Nowhere to run, no one to get in his way, no one to make him hold back and take it easy on the hero wannabe. A flash of green, hollow eyes staring through him as a white-gloved fist appeared, as if drawn out of a magician's hat, right in front of his face. The whole scene had a dreamlike unreality to it, like a nightmare that seemed laughably absurd even as it sent a chill up his spine. Recovery Girl kept him there until the end of the day, by which time it was too late to reassert his place at the top of the classroom. The school had evidently told his parents about the whole thing, since both his parents had come to pick him up. His old hag of a mom shouted at him for being reckless and getting himself hurt on the second day, but the words had no bite to them, and that somehow stung more. Like he was too weak to take her anger and disappointment, too fragile after being one-upped by the weakest kid in the whole school. Katsuki let himself simmer in silence, too exhausted and shell-shocked for real anger. The next morning, Katsuki hadn't even remembered what had happened until he looked in the mirror. Purple and black splotches covered half his face. A trembling finger brought to his nose leapt away as pain shot through the sensitive cartilage. The memories came flooding back, and this time, he had the strength for anger. His hand crashed palm first into the mirror. Beads of nitroglycerin sweat popped, shattering the mirror into 100 tinkling shards. His mom ran up the steps and screamed at him. He screamed back. They fired salvos of swear words, each more explicit and bombastic than the last, the booms and cracks of their clashing voices turning the tiny, glass-covered bathroom into a war zone. By the end, Katsuki was grounded for a week and grinning like a maniac. He was back. Yue wouldn't know what hit it. By the end of the day, he'd be back at the top of the food chain. His enthusiasm died a slow and ugly death in class that day. To kick off his absolutely horrible day, their creepy homeless teacher went over yesterday's combat training, giving everyone specific pointers on how to improve. While Katsuki greatly enjoyed the fact his face was awesome enough to break 2 of Deku's fingers, he did not enjoy getting lectured in front of the entire class on how he was a jackass for charging headfirst into an unknown situation and getting himself taken out without alerting his teammate. That wasn't his fault. He was up against fucking Deku. Deku wasn't supposed to be able to do anything. And the quivering lump of jelly he had for a teammate should have been just as useless. It wasn't his fault the universe decided to turn itself upside down. First period was modern art history, an awkward subject for Katsuki, given how Aldera Junior High never touched it and he had blown it off as a waste of time. Midnight's first move was to explain that they studied it to better understand how heroes influence artistic media, which seemed like a stretch to Katsuki. But given it was a requisite course and he wouldn't settle for anything less than top grades, he resolved to memorize every word of their textbooks. He was already 5 chapters ahead by Wednesday, having plowed through the book the first chance he got. And yet, he found himself pausing at a few questions, struggling to recall the hastily assimilated information. Most other students, even Miss Know-It-All the recommended student, seemed just as off balance as he was. Deku, quiet, insignificant Deku, on the other hand, had turned into a fucking art critic overnight, answering every question and earning nothing less than Midnight's absolute admiration. In a way, it made sense. Katsuki wasn't blind. He had seen those hero drawings in Deku's books. It made sense he'd happened to have an absurd amount of knowledge on this one, obscure subject. As much as it stung to concede defeat, Katsuki had reckoned on losing only this battle and winning the war. Second period was another rout. Math, Katsuki's strongest subject, had turned into a confusing maze of integrals and derivatives, exponents and logarithmic tangled like cables carelessly heaped into a drawer, difficult, but not impossible to untangle. Yet, the moment the grinning pile of goop scrawled out a calculus problem, Deku had his hand raised, with a perfect answer every time. Even 4 eyes couldn't keep up, and he had fucking jet engines for legs. It was the same in every single subject. Deku spoke English as if he had been huffing hamburgers since childhood, had every book in the literature syllabus downloaded to his brain, and recited hero regulations as if he had written them himself. As galling as it was to find himself behind Deku, being visibly behind the recommended chick, who was also behind Deku, stung worse. If it had been just her ahead of him, he'd have rejoiced at the prospect of a worthy contender, someone to surpass on his road to being the greatest hero. But to be outclassed by someone who was in turn outclassed by Deku just rubbed salt into his wounds. As the day wore on, Katsuki came to an infuriating conclusion. Deku had been holding out. He had deliberately held back in middle school to make him look like an idiot at UA. How else could he go from a B-level piece of furniture to top of the class in a single summer? Katsuki swore to himself he'd make Deku pay. Maybe Deku was smart enough for UA, but he'd never be strong enough to be a hero. One way or another, he would prove it. So, Wednesday afternoon, he waited outside UA. But Deku never showed. He got back home half an hour late and had to make a half-assed excuse about having to take a detour when his mother got on his ass for not coming home right away. When he heard the next day that Deku was training every day after school with Eraserhead, Katsuki decided that curfew can go fuck itself. He wasn't waiting a whole week while Deku rubbed his inhuman intelligence into his face. So, Thursday afternoon, as the sun sank below the high-rise apartments, casting an orange glow on their windows, he followed Deku into a quiet, empty alleyway. He made no effort to hide his footsteps. Rather, he went out of his way to make extra noise, trying to make the quirkless wimp turn around. Deku didn't even twitch. Gritting his teeth, Katsuki strode faster until he was within reach of him. Deku, he roared, raising his right fist. He waited until Deku started turning to throw the punch, waited until he could see the panic in his eyes, like the nightmare of getting beaten in combat training. There was no fear in Deku's expression as he watched Katsuki coming towards him. Deku caught Katsuki's punch by the wrist. Pulling back, Deku forced Katsuki to lean further forward while pressing his knee into Katsuki's thigh. Unbalanced, Katsuki fell forward, catching himself with his free hand. He tried to roll over, tried to wriggle loose from Deku's grasp, but the smaller boy was on top of his back, wrestling his hand into a painful hold, palm pressed flat against his back. Katsuki brought up his left hand, detonating the nitroglycerin on his palm, but Deku leaned aside, letting the blast ruffle his hair. Deku snagged the other hand and forced it next to his right, holding them both in place with a knee. "I'm sorry about this, Kaken." Katsuki wriggled, but he couldn't break free. "What the hell, Deku? Let me go. Stop struggling. We need to talk." "Like hell I will. Get the fuck off." Katsuki wriggled and wriggled, but nothing he did made Deku budge an inch. As he struggled, he became painfully aware that, with his palms pressed against his back, he may as well be quirkless. The skin on his hands could stand up to his explosions, but everything else was too sensitive. He'd scorch his back if he tried blasting his way free. It was Deku's way of making Katsuki as worthless as he was, and the mere thought of it made Katsuki sorely tempted to light up his hands like fireworks. His back be damned. Exhausted after his fruitless struggle, Katsuki sagged, letting his head rest on the dirty concrete. "What the fuck do you want?" Deku rolled up one of his sleeves and held his scarred arm in front of Katsuki's face. "Not all these are your doing, but enough are to get you into serious trouble." Katsuki snorted. "Seriously? Nobody gives a damn about you." Aldera didn't, but Aldera was an impoverished school desperate to get someone with a powerful quirk to graduate and put them on the map. They would have covered up murder if it meant getting you into UA. But at UA, it's a different story. They have a reputation to keep, and nobody wants a hero that abuses their classmates. It'd be bad press for UA if someone found out they accepted someone with your track record for hurting people. Katsuki froze, sagging under Deku's weight. The pebble in the road, by some cruel optical illusion, had turned into an indomitable mountain in the far distance the moment he turned the bend towards UA. Deku was smarter than him, Deku was stronger than him, and now Deku had him at his mercy. What made it worse is Deku had the balls to look sorry as he ground his face in the dirt. Deku stared sorrowfully at him through the grimy glass shard in front of Katsuki's eyes. "So, what? You're going to get me in trouble? What you did would have you expelled, at the very least. If I pressed charges, you could even get arrested. You'd never be a hero." Hot, stinging tears worked their way out of Katsuki's eyes. "You're just rubbing it in before you fuck me over, huh? Having fun, Deku?" His voice was shaking, and he couldn't stop it, but he refused to break down sobbing. "Not at all. This is the only way to get through to you. This is the only way to get you to listen to me. If there was any other way, I'd take it." It sounded more like Deku was trying to convince himself than Katsuki. "Fine, I'm listening, happy. Say whatever the fuck you have to say and let me go. My old hag's already going to chew me out for being late." "All right then. I want you to do 3 things for me. First, no more swear words. Heroes don't swear." "The fuck?" Deku's knee dug into his back, crushing his fingers. Katsuki groaned and gritted his teeth. "That's your last one," Deku said. "If I hear you swear again, I'll go straight to the principal. Do you understand? Are you foo? Are you blackmailing me?" Katsuki watched him through the glass. Deku looked away, and his shoulders slumped. "It's the only way." Hysterical laughter bubbled up in Katsuki as tears dripped down his face. "Are you foo? For real? What makes you think you can get away with this?" "Second," Deku said, "make friends with Mineta-san and Kaminari-san." "A pervert in the dunce?" Katsuki asked angrily. "You can't be serious." "I am. Invite them to the arcade next Sunday. If they accept, I'll keep your secret. My advice is to start eating lunch with them. Act nicely around everyone, not just them, and wait until next Tuesday before asking them. I'll pay for it, since it's only fair." "You seriously want me to?" "Also, make sure Mineta doesn't get himself expelled. You can hardly be friends with him if he gets himself kicked out for peeping in the women's locker room." "Foo." Katsuki cut himself off before he could swear. The blackmail, the humiliation, Deku's casual attitude as he told him how to live his life, like he was a cute little Pomeranian on a leash, made his blood boil. Once again, he bucked and tried to throw Deku off, and once again, Deku's knee forced him back into the dirt. Sweating, tired, and emotionally spent, Katsuki asked in a sullen voice, dreading what the answer would be. "What's the third thing?" "Be the hero I could never be." Deku put something in his pocket, released him, and walked away. Katsuki struggled to get up, half blind with rage, ready to strangle Deku, but by the time he made it back onto his feet, Deku was long gone. He felt around in his pocket and found a 5,000 yen note, clean, neatly folded, fresh from a local bank. Katsuki almost tore it up. Katsuki cut himself off, seized with the fear that Deku might still be nearby, waiting for him to crack. Howling in anger, Katsuki punched a brick wall, leaving a scorch mark as his sweat exploded. The sharp ache of his bruised fingers did nothing to dull the ponderous, cold dread in his gut. Katsuki made it back home just before sunset. His mother was on him at an instant, shouting at him for not coming home on time 2 days in a row. Too tired to put up a fight, Katsuki murmured an apology and waited for her to stop shouting. She must have known something was off, from his disheveled clothes, bloodied fingers, and tear-stained face. Her voice softened to a tone Katsuki hadn't heard in years and asked him what was wrong. He couldn't answer her. Alone in his room, without anyone to watch him, Katsuki broke down, sobbing into his pillow as the sun set. If any class was going to give Aizawa Shouta gray hairs before his time, it would be this one. It had been just over a week since class had started, but he was already sure he'd have nightmares for years to come. Sharp glances were keeping Minta in line for now, but he knew he'd have to give the lecherous kid a private lecture before he got out of hand. Yaoyorozu was slowly crumbling before his eyes, the evident cause being she didn't find herself at the center of this classroom's universe. He might not have even noticed if Nezu hadn't pointed out her confidence issues in an offhand manner, but knowing what to watch for, he could see the subtle signs of her shattered self-worth. Todoroki was cold and quiet. That scar, coupled with his asocial attitude, made him wonder if he had 2 abused children in class. Oddly enough, the one he had pegged as the worst of the bunch, the foul-mouthed teen who had the temperament of a lit torch thrown into a fireworks factory, had gone an overnight transformation. His behavior didn't quite do a complete 180, but he'd call it a big step in the right direction. He had stopped insulting his classmates, and even attempted talking to Minta and Kaminari. The swearing didn't entirely vanish, but Katsuki would always catch himself before he let one slip. Shouta noticed that he would glance at Midoriya each time it happened. Speaking of Midoriya, Shouta was blown away by his performance thus far. Every teacher he talked to gushed about their new star pupil, raising his hand for every question and giving perfect answers every time. Shouta couldn't blame them. During their training sessions, Midoriya absorbed every drop of information, every exercise, every Wing Chun drill, all of it like parched desert soil. Midoriya only needed to see or be told something once to execute it perfectly, and he would continue to execute it with the precision of factory equipment until his arms shook with exhaustion. After verifying that Midoriya was doing all his personal strength and stamina training correctly, Aizawa focused on giving him a crash course on all the CQC he could teach him. Blocks, punches, throws, dodges, and everything in between. He learned months' worth of martial arts in a matter of days. As Midoriya continued his explosive growth, Shouta found himself growing rationally angry at all the teachers that had failed him, all the teachers that ignored the enormous potential lying right under their noses. He imagined how much farther Midoriya would be if he had just started his training a year earlier, or 2. Friday afternoon, as Shouta retreated to the break room to rejuvenate himself with a pot of coffee, All Might, shrunken down to his civilian form, crept into the room. "Ah, Aizawa-san, I was hoping to get a chance to talk to you. It's been a long week, and I haven't seen you around much." Shouta held back a sigh. "What is it, Yagi-san?" "Well, I had questions about the combat training. 2 of my students got sent to the nurse's office, and I was wondering what I could have done differently. Should I have told them to take it easy on each other before they started? Should I have stepped in when it looked like something bad was about to happen? I'm not sure if there was anything I could have even done, but..." Shouta held a hand up, stopping the torrent of doubt and insecurity pouring from the number 1 hero. Nobody was permanently injured, and the class continued with minimal disruption. "You handled it just fine, but they broke bones." Shouta gave him a flat, disapproving look. "Yes, they did. Your point." Toshinori coughed in surprise and wiped at the blood on his lips. "Aizawa-san, I know I'm not an experienced teacher, but isn't that going too far? Isn't it a part of our job to keep these children safe?" "Safe?" Shouta snapped. "You want to keep them safe. Coddle them like that, and they'll die to the first villain that breaks their nose. That sounds a bit extreme." "Really? I figured that you'd understand how dangerous hero work is, given that hole in your chest." One of Toshinori's hands reflexively went to the old wound. That was not exactly a typical circumstance, and most of us can't punch the weather away, Shouta said dryly. "For all your strength, for all your power, you still got a crippling injury, something that would have killed anyone else. Heroes die all the time in this line of work. Nobody realizes it because they're all paying attention to you. Every time you save a civilian or lock up a prominent villain, it makes the front pages and 6 o'clock news, and in the meantime, lesser heroes die to nameless villains, a tragedy forgotten by the next headline." Aizawa-san, for what it's worth, I think it's a good thing nobody realizes how dangerous the world had become, but you're not going to be around forever." Aizawa poured himself a cup, grimaced at all the grounds lurking at the bottom, and drank the whole mug in one go. Sooner or later, that wound's going to make you retire, or worse, kill you off, and when that happens, it's going to be ugly. If I'm lucky, I won't be alive to see it happen, but I know my students will have to clean up whatever you leave behind. I want to make sure they're ready for that, and if you have any respect for their lives, you'll do the same. Toshinori was pale, so pale that Aizawa was worried it might be from blood loss. His hands clenched, and fire returned to his hollow, blue eyes. I'll make sure it won't come to that. I'll find someone who can stand just as tall as I can, who can inspire the people, give them hope, drive back villainy and crime. The symbol of peace won't die with me. It might not be perfect, but it's better than letting our home fall to chaos. Aizawa tightened his scarf and went for the door. I'll make sure that symbol of peace won't be needed. Izuku met Todoroki at a small, local sober restaurant. The decor was muted and tasteful: dark wooden tables, comfortable booths, decorative light fixtures, elegant drawings of ocean waves and leaping fish on the walls. Todoroki wore formal attire, a collared shirt and khakis a touch too small for him, that looked as though they had been sitting in a closet for a year. Knowing ahead of time, Izuku matched Todoroki's attire, though it cost him 10,000 yen's worth of art commissions. The noodles weren't cheap either. The grilled shrimp were warm, but the noodles themselves were chilled, a dichotomy that seemed to appeal to Todoroki. The dish was topped with a chili flake slurry that had a pleasant, smoky burn. The noodles themselves were infused with green tea, adding herbal notes to each bite. Todoroki looked up from his soba every couple of bites, evidently wondering how to, or if he should break the silence between them. Izuku knew he should wait. Let Todoroki settle into the unfamiliar environment, feel the comfort in knowing that no words need to be said. Once he finished his first bowl, Izuku asked for a couple bowls of donberi, cheaper and more filling than the soba. Pushing his body to its physical limits had put his appetite into overdrive, as if his body had turned into a raging inferno, burning itself to ash. The days of intense physical training, a desperate rush to prepare himself for the USJ, had already left him with bone-deep fatigue. A heavy-lidded sense that he would fall asleep the moment he rested his head kept at bay by unhealthy quantities of coffee. Todoroki ordered himself 2 more bowls. Is Aizawa-sensei making you train a lot? Todoroki asked. I have to. I'm so far behind everyone else. The donberi came with slices of raw salmon, pickled seaweed, and unagi sauce. It lacked the savory spice of the soba, but the interplay between the earthy seaweed and tangy, sweet sauce was no less appetizing. Todoroki matched him bite for bite, and within 10 minutes they had cleaned their plates. The waitress came around, bill in hand, and Izuku took it. I asked if you wanted to come. It's only fair I pay for it. Todoroki watched with a troubled expression as Izuku put crisp, freshly withdrawn bills on the table, leaving a generous tip. Why did you invite me here? He asked. Because I felt like it. Todoroki's countenance soured. Is it because of endeavor? Not at all, Izuku said. I am aware you both share the same family name. I wouldn't be much of a hero fanboy, would I be, if I didn't recognize that much? But I wasn't aware that you two had a familial relationship until you brought it up just now. The fire did make me wonder. At the mention of the fire, Todoroki grimaced and looked away. Izuku leaned forward and said, I'm guessing things aren't great between you and him. Stony silence was Todoroki's only answer. Instead of trying to pry further, Izuku said, I don't remember my father. My mom says he had a fire quirk, not as strong as Endeavor's. When I was really little, I hoped I'd get his quirk. I spent a lot of time waving my hands in front of a candle, trying to make the fire move. One time, when it was getting a bit late for my quirk to come in, I even stuck my hand into the flame, as if that would make the quirk appear somehow. All I got out of it were burned fingers. Todoroki poked his chopsticks at the dregs of chili flakes in his bowl, not meeting Izuku's eyes. You never got your quirk. No, I didn't. Yet you're trying to be a hero anyways. I can't see myself doing anything else. Why? Todoroki asked. Why do you want to be a hero so badly? I want to help people. Todoroki blinked. That's it? He asked incredulously. Anger crept into his voice. Do you expect me to believe that? I can tell you're being pushed to your physical limits, exercising until your arms and legs ache, never quite able to catch your breath, so exhausted each night you pass out before taking your clothes off. You're telling me that you're willing to suffer all that just because you want to help people? When I was little, Izuku said, one of my favorite videos was when All Might made his debut. There was no villain to fight, no flashy battle, no cool super moves. It was just All Might, a burning building, and over 100 civilians trapped inside. As the building collapsed around him, All Might charged inside, running out with 12 people on his shoulders each time. The whole time, through every second of that rescue, he had this big grin on his face, a grin that said that everything would be okay. Midoriya made his own smile, a pale imitation, but one that got a visible response out of Todoroki. I wanted to be like that. Todoroki glowered. My father's been trying to be better than him his whole career. What makes you think you could be anything like him without a quirk? You don't need to be strong to save people. As weak as I was, there was someone who would have died if I hadn't saved them. It's why I went to UA. I saw the chance to be a hero, and I took it. Midoriya chuckled and scratched at his hair. To tell the truth, I didn't think I'd get as far as I did. So, you're not trying to be number one. I know I never could be. Just saving people is enough for me. Todoroki leaned back in his chair, still processing everything Izuku had said. While he was distracted, Izuku asked, "What about you? Why did you go to UA? Not your business. Is it because your father made you?" The silence between them was cold and dense enough to climb with an ice axe. Todoroki stared frostily at Izuku and asked, "What makes you think that? It doesn't seem like you like your father that much. You always call him Endeavor, for one." Todoroki winced. He stared down at the table, never meeting Izuku's eyes. "Just drop it, all right. It's nothing." As much as Izuku hated himself for forcing the issue, he knew that he had to get through to Todoroki. "Do you actually want to be a hero?" "Yes, I decided on my own that I will be a hero, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm not going to use Endeavor's power. That's why you don't use your fire." Todoroki nodded. "I'll become the number one hero with just my ice." "You probably could," Izuku said. "Your ice is a very strong and versatile quirk, arguably better than Endeavor's. It reduces property damage, though you'll need to be careful not to freeze pipes. It can reshape the terrain, shield civilians, treat burns, imprison villains, though watch for hypothermia and frostbite, and it gives you more mobility." "You really think I can do it?" "Absolutely," Todoroki snorted, a ghost of a smile forming on his lips. "Endeavor always said I was holding myself back, wasting my potential, would never beat All Might if I didn't use both sides of my quirk. It feels nice, hearing from someone that I can do it." Izuku wanted to leave the conversation there, at that high note, with Todoroki happy and content, but he knew what had to come next. "You shouldn't." Todoroki's smile vanished, like a snowflake drifting through a bonfire. "Why not?" "Because someday, somewhere, there's going to be someone you could only save with your fire. Someone freezing to death, surrounded by villains, with no one else to save them. No way for you to call back up or get them somewhere warmer. Someone who will die unless you use your fire to warm them up." Todoroki's mismatched eyes bored into him. "You can't know that. If you're serious about being a pro hero, you'll have to be ready for it. When that day comes, I hope that someone else's life will mean more to you than what your dad thinks of you." Izuku stood, straightened his shirt, and said, "I should get going before my mom starts worrying. She doesn't like it when I stay out late. Have a good night, Shoto-kun." The familiarity bothered Izuku, who was ill-accustomed to being familiar with anyone, but he had faith that it was the final set of words that would save his life at the USJ. The dojo that Ajiro trained at, which doubled as his home, was nestled between a ramen shop and a quick mart. The wooden floors had nicks and dents, but they were polished until they shone, and though their mats and gi had seen better days, everything was clean and smelled of juniper. Ajiro's own gi was no less time-worn than the rest of the dojo, but his clothes were freshly laundered and expertly folded, his green belt gleaming around his waist. The living space over the dojo was almost as cramped as the Midoriya's apartment. To Izuku's eyes, it was cozy. The furniture was worn with age, from seats that had shaped themselves to the people that sat in them every night for many years, to the table with subtle indents where bowls and plates had been set at every meal, to couches where one could tell who sat where by the size and shape of the indent in the cushion. An old cathode ray television sat on a cabinet in the living room, playing the news over crackling speakers. Old photographs hung room every wall, some showing Mashurao holding up a new belt, training in the dojo, smiling in front of a birthday cake, held in his mother's arms as an infant. Others were much older, the colors bleached by sunlight, of the parents as they grew up. The whole place had a history to it, one that remembered the Ajiro family through generations. Ajiro's father greeted Izuku warmly and beamed when he expressed interest in martial arts. He was an older man, blonde hair going gray at the temples, wiry and lean. His tail was thin and slender, lacking the weight and strength of Ajiro's tail, but more dexterous, able to pour a cup of tea while he brought out the sugar. As they drank, Izuku thanked him for the tea, complimenting its deep, herbal flavor, and the older man replied that he had good taste. All the talking upstairs was small talk, how school was going, what his home life was like, what interested him about martial arts. Izuku asked questions of his own, how long they've run the dojo, were there any competitions, what the process was for getting belts, asked more out of politeness than any interest in the answers. Once they had finished the tea, Ajiro led Izuku back downstairs. He gave him a gi out of a hamper and let Izuku change in the bathroom. Izuku's hands went through the motions as if he had worn a gi countless times before, though it had been his first time trying on the garment, because he already knew the hand motions he would make to hold the garment together. Ajiro seemed startled when he walked out. He recovered, but his expression became more guarded. It wasn't something Izuku could help, he reasoned, since he had no idea what had caused it and his future showed it happening anyways. Over one of the tatami mats, Ajiro led him through some basic blocks and counters. Ajiro would demonstrate once, either having Izuku try to punch him or take a blow, and have Izuku replicate his movements. His vision of the future showed him how to execute each move. Armed with that knowledge, Izuku quickly made his way through the exercises. After he demonstrated proficiency in blocking and attacking, Ajiro showed him throws. They both hit the mats many times as they walked through each throw. "You're learning fast," Ajiro said once they were done. He poured out 2 cups of water from a nearby fountain and offered Izuku one. "If you're interested, you could try getting a belt. You'd start out as a novice, but you could get my rank within a few years." "Thanks, but I'd rather focus on becoming a hero." Ajiro's smile faltered. "Well, couldn't you do both? I mean, what else could you do if you want to fend for yourself as a hero?" "I still intend to learn martial arts, but I should also think about what kind of support gear I'll work with." Midoriya gestured at his short, skinny frame. "As I am, I'm never going to cut it fighting with my bare hands." "Well, what if your equipment breaks or you run out of it? Then I'd use my hands." Avoiding that is part of a hero's job as well. "Sure, I need to be prepared for emergencies. That's why I want to learn martial arts, but support equipment will make me more effective as a hero." Ajiro's tail whipped back and forth as he thought to himself, "I guess I can understand that. But if you devoted yourself entirely to martial arts, eventually, you would be good enough not to need any equipment. It would take longer, yes, but in the end, with hard work and practice, you could achieve anything with your bare hands." "What would happen in the meantime?" Izuku countered. "How many people would I fail to save because I decided not to use support equipment? We're just students. It'll be years before we'll have to save someone. You'll have plenty to master martial arts before then." Izuku shook his head. "There's work studies over the summer. While we won't be allowed to engage villains, it's possible we'll be forced to defend ourselves and others." Ajiro faltered, but with visible inspiration, he rallied himself. "You won't be allowed any equipment during the sports festival. If you want to get into the work studies, you'll need to be able to fend for yourself without that equipment. You won't be able to save anyone during work studies if hero agencies never notice you." "True, but martial arts won't be of much help during the early rounds. Those are usually either a race or some form of team-based exercise. As long as I make it to the bracket, I'll get some offers." Ajiro thought for a moment and sighed in defeat. "You have a point. Still, I'm farther along in my training. Adding equipment now would just throw off my fighting style." Izuku feigned surprise. "You're not going to add any equipment? I thought I had some good ideas." "You did," Ajiro said uneasily. "It's just that they don't fit with my style as a hero." "Why not? I thought I picked weapons that seemed right at home with a martial artist's aesthetic." "Well, I kind of want to be a hero that doesn't have to depend on equipment. So many heroes these days only fight as well as they do because of their equipment, like Endeavor's coolant suit, but there's one hero who's amazing without any support equipment. All Might." "Exactly. He made me believe that I could be an amazing hero just with my family's martial arts. That's what I want to be a hero for, to show everyone that heroes are more than just their equipment." "The only reason All Might doesn't use any support equipment is that nothing can handle his strength," Izuku said. "It's not about making a point or showing what can be done. I know that if there was support equipment that would help him save people, he would use it, because that's what matters most to him." How do you know that?" Izuku took out his first hero journal, brought along for this moment. The entire book, front to back, was devoted entirely to All Might, from his childish hero worship to concrete analysis of his career. Early in his career, Izuku said as he flipped to the relevant section, All Might worked closely with David's shield. There were some prototypes he tried, but all of them broke when he used his quirk. Ajiro stared in shock at the sketched images of All Might wearing modified gauntlets and boots. "I had no idea. It was a long time ago. I had to do a lot of digging to find good images for these sketches." After a deep breath, Ajiro stood tall and said, "Well, I'll be the first, then. I'll show everyone you don't need equipment to be a hero. Honestly, you probably could. It would be hard, but you could do it, and you'd even gain popularity in some circles for sticking with that promise." "You really think so?" "You could," Izuku said, bracing himself for another set of shattered dreams. "But I don't think you should." Ajiro's face went blank. "Why not?" "Because, one day, there will be someone that your martial arts can't save, no matter how much you practice. The villain will be too far away, out of your reach, and someone will die because of it. Sure, you'd still be a hero, but you would wonder what would have happened if you had the tools to save that person." Frustration slowly surfaced on Ajiro's face, though he struggled to contain it. After an awkward silence, Izuku slipped off the gi, handed it back to Ajiro, and said he had to go home. Once Izuku had left, the elder Ajiro, teacup in hand, told the younger, "Cherish the friend that gives you advice they know you don't want to hear. Those are the kind that truly care about you." Ashido took Izuku to a bustling, vibrant matcha shop. colorful furniture, pop music playing over the speakers. Bright pink uniforms worn by smiling employees assaulted Izuku's senses as they got in line. It took nearly 10 minutes for the sheer volume of customers to wind their way through the queue and get their matcha before it was their turn. Ashido got strawberry flavor, and Izuku went with mint, already knowing how it would taste. Waiting in line, with a cute girl leaning on his shoulder, Izuku felt a strange combination of awkwardness and exhilaration. Even knowing everything that would happen, it felt strangely unreal that he, quirkless, worthless Deku, was on a date with a girl. It wouldn't last, but at least he could say he had gone on a date before he died. Ashido looked right at home in the flamboyant atmosphere. With a black tank top and shorts that showed enough leg to make Izuku uneasy every time he looked down. Izuku went with a plain long-sleeve shirt and jeans, casual, but a bit stuffier than anything that would have fit the venue. Their seat was in the middle of the turmoil, with people passing them and idle conversations droning over the backdrop music. Ashido dug right in, tearing a big bite of pink-colored rice cake and chewing it vigorously. Izuku ate his green-colored treat at a more deliberate pace. "Isn't this stuff the best, Izu-kun?" Ashido asked between bites. Izuku had to speak louder than usual to make himself heard. "It's really good. Thanks for inviting me here, Ashido-san." Ashido waggled a finger in front of Izuku's face. "Nope, we're on a date, so you have to call me Mina-chan." "Sure, Mina-chan." Izuku couldn't remember the last time he had used such a casual honorific. Despite his nerves, the name rolled easily off his tongue. Mina smiled at him. "So, how long have you been drawing?" "I started when I was really little. 4, I think. After I saw All Might for the first time, I got obsessed with heroes. I started drawing pictures and writing about them. And as time went on, I got better at both." "You have more journals, right? Mind if I see one?" "Sure." Izuku had his latest journal on him since there will be a villain attack right around the corner in an hour. He had only just started it, with a few entries on Kamui Woods and Mount Lady. Mina chuckled when she saw the heroine's skimpy outfit. "Careful, Izu-kun. People might think you're a pervert if you keep drawing stuff like this." Izuku leaned forward to see the image that she was talking about. Mount Lady was leaning forward, greeting her audience and showing a generous amount of cleavage. Some rough-sketched bystanders were drawn in for scale. Her costume has to stretch many times its size when she grows. It can only cover so much at full size. I bet she does that on purpose. Well, it has certainly gotten a lot of attention. I've been getting so many commissions for her lately. "You do commissions?" Mina waggled her eyebrows with a mischievous smile. "Do you do naughty commissions?" Izuku shook his head. "People offered me a lot of money, but I never felt comfortable with it. I know some heroes, like Midnight, say it's fine, but it feels wrong, like I'm stripping them myself and letting people ogle them." "Yeah, I can see how that would be weird." "How much did they offer?" "One guy offered 50,000 yen. Most do 5 to 10,000. Mina's jaw dropped. "That much, really? That's for the really hard stuff to make." Izuku took out his phone and opened some image files. "I usually make them on a tablet. Makes it easier to do the shading and add effects." "Wow, that's awesome." Mina flipped through the files, marveling at each one. "You made all these. How much time did it take?" "Each one takes a couple days. I have to do the line art, fill in the colors, then the shading. Shading takes a long time to get right. I wish I could make art this pretty. All I can do are doodles." "What do you do for fun?" Izuku asked. "Aside from asking out cute boys?" Mina asked with a sly smile. "I like dancing." "Really? What kind?" "Just dancing, I guess. Whatever's fun. I've been dying to try out a nightclub, but my parents won't let me." "Don't you have to be 20? "Yeah, but once I move out, I'll get a fake ID. And party it up." Mina leaned closer and whispered, "You can come with me if you want." Izuku shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I want to focus on hero work." Mina's horns drooped. "Oh, so, does that mean?" "Yeah, I'd rather not get into anything right now." "Sorry." "No, it's fine. I understand." Mina smiled at him and said, "Thanks for coming, though I still had lots of fun." "Same here. No one's ever asked me out before, so thanks for doing that. It was really nice of you." "Really? No one was interested in you?" "Well, I am quirkless." Mina winced. She punched him lightly on the shoulder. They all missed out. "You're pretty great." "Thanks. You're pretty great too." Mina giggled and said, "Well, if you ever change your mind, you have my number. I'm not going to wait around forever, so don't get mad at me if I have to turn you down because I'm with someone else." "That's fine. Anyways, I had some ideas for your hero outfit you might like." "Really? Let's hear it." Opening up his notebook, he showed Mina his rough sketch of a set of bulbous gloves. "I don't know. I'm not sure I like the way they look." "That can be fixed. The general idea is that you can store the acid you make, so you can release it all at once later. Like what Bakugo does." "I don't know. Acid can be pretty dangerous. It's usually better just to use a little bit at a time." "It could be useful in emergencies," Izuku said. "Like if there's a lot of villains at once, or a really powerful one." It could also clear obstacles. It would be tough to use around civilians and could cause severe property damage, which is why it should be used sparingly. Still, I think you should at least try it, see what you think. Well, you're the smart one. If you think I should, then I will. Cool. I can't wait to see it in action. You'll draw me when I use it, right? Show me how it turns out. He knew he would never be around for a second date, but it was nice to know that she was interested. While they were jogging under Aizawa's supervision, Izuku ran up to Uraraka and said, I noticed you have trouble nullifying the gravity of multiple objects at once. Ah, Midoriya-kun. Yeah, Uraraka said between breaths, I get nauseous when I try it. Have you tried making objects just a bit lighter instead of nullifying it altogether? It might be easier on you. I never thought of that. Thanks, I'll give it a try. Izuku could only guess how it would save her life, but he knew that short conversation would matter. Midoriya and Ko knew that her son was not okay. Learning that he had been quirkless, despite both his parents having quirks, shattered her baby Izuku's dream of being a hero. Maybe she shouldn't have told him it wouldn't be possible. Maybe her son would still be happy if she had let him live a lie, but she knew she couldn't live with herself if Izuku got himself hurt trying to be a hero without a quirk. The first couple weeks were hell. If Izuku wasn't crying over his favorite All Might video, he had the lifeless demeanor of a zombie. And if he wasn't dejectedly staring off into space, he was working on his notebook with shaking fingers. Inko almost broke down. Almost told him that he could still be a hero, that he could sign up for martial arts or something, learn how to save others without a quirk. If it had gone on for much longer, she might have. It was as if a switch was flipped in Izuku's brain. One day, the crying, the listlessness, the expression of a broken heart and shattered dreams was replaced by apathy. Sure, he still smiled or frowned at things. Over the years, Enko learned to read the subtle changes in expression. However, he never laughed, never seemed surprised at anything, never said more than he needed to or tried anything different. He kept to himself, working on his hero notebooks and studying for school. Enko sometimes wondered if she should take her son to a psychologist. Even if it would cost her more than she could afford, she could find a way to make it work. The only thing that stopped her was the fact that she couldn't say that anything was wrong with her son. He didn't behave like other kids. But his grades were normal and his teachers didn't have any comments. If she couldn't say there was wrong with him, then would there even be anything to fix? The slime incident seemed to spark a change in Izuku. He started working out, eating more, and going outside. When she asked why, Izuku told her that he had applied to UA's hero program and he wanted to pass. As tempted as she was to put her foot down, tell him it was too dangerous, especially after a villain nearly killed him, the thought of him finally coming out of his shell changed her mind. Inko had hoped that she would get her smiling son back. Only, he never did come out of that shell. Though his appetite improved and his body grew visibly more athletic, Izuku's attitude remained unchanged. As the day of the exam approached, Izuku showed no hint of excitement or anxiety. He left home with his backpack slung over his shoulders, a pair of garden shears poking out the top, and a plexiglass shield in one hand. When Izuku got the results back, with the top score on the physical exam and a passing grade on the written portion, earning a full-ride scholarship on top of getting into the hero program, and casually tossed the acceptance letter on the table without a hint of joy or happiness, Inko knew she had to talk to someone. She waited until the school year began, waited until she could take a day off from both of her jobs, before calling up the school. After telling the assistant what she wanted, she was quickly passed to the principal. She quickly explained her concerns, and he asked her what time would work best for her. When she said she could make any time on Monday, he scheduled her for an early morning visit. After Izuku left for school, Inko packed her own backpack, filling it with the doctor's notice she got when he was 4, along with anything else she thought could explain what she thought was wrong. Pictures of him alone during birthday parties, his neutral expression when he got a new All Might figurine, report cards and notes from parent-teacher conferences. Eraser had met her out at the school gates. Izuku had told him who he was and explained how he operated outside the limelight. But it felt hard to believe that the unkempt, shabby-looking man wasn't only her son's homeroom teacher, but also a pro-hero. The press parted uneasily around him as he glared them aside, making room for Inko. Eraserhead complimented her for not wasting any time and led her into the school. She gawked at the scenery, struggling to take in how vast and modern the school looked, but Eraserhead's rapid pace made her hustle to keep up with him. She was nearly out of breath by the time they made it to a conference room. A tiny, white-furred rodent in a suit and an old lady in a doctor's robe with a syringe for a hair ornament were waiting for her, seated around a large table. 4 cups of tea were set out, still steaming hot, with a white china pot at the center of the table. Eraserhead sat next to the rodent, leaving Inko the seat at the far end of the table. Inko tried the tea and found it refreshingly sweet. "I'm not fond of fruity teas myself," the rodent told her, "but I figured you would enjoy this more. Is it to your liking?" "Yes, thank you." Inko took another sip to calm her nerves. Thank you for meeting with me, Nezu-san. I don't want to be a bother. Not at all, Nezu said. The welfare of this institution's students will always be my top priority. I am happy to meet with concerned parents at any time. Gesturing at the others around the table, Nezu said, This is Shuzenji Chiyo, the school nurse, and Aizawa Shouta, Midoriya-kun's homeroom teacher. So, I know we discussed this over the phone a bit, but I would appreciate it if you could give us a detailed account of what concerns you have. Inko told them everything she could think of. The doctor's diagnosis and his behavior the few weeks after, the sudden change, his apathy, the slime villain attack, and his fervent training afterwards. She showed her pictures, the notes, the medical records, wondering if the teachers were going to think she was crazy. It sounded crazy to her, all laid out, crazy to raise a fuss over her son being distant and withdrawn after having his dreams crushed, but it felt good to get all her worries off her chest. Nezu had been taking notes throughout her speech. When she stopped, he kept writing a few minutes, the scratching of his fountain-tip pen filling the silence in the room. Is that everything? He asked. Yes, thank you for listening. I'm sorry if I wasted your time. You aren't omitting anything, are you? Nezu's beady eyes seemed to bore holes into her skull. Inko swallowed nervously and said, No, I don't think so. Why, is something wrong? Shuzenji and Aizawa exchanged a look that made Inko's stomach plummet. Nezu tapped his pen on the table, lost in thought. For the record, the principal said, I don't suspect any wrongdoing on your part. Inko's heart nearly stopped at the gravity of his tone and words. However, if I find reason to believe otherwise, I may have to involve the authorities. Inko's heart joined her stomach somewhere near her toes. What happened? Both faculty members turned towards the principal. Nezu took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry to ask you like this, but are you aware of Izuku's scars? His what? Nezu nodded towards Aizawa. The teacher took out a remote, turning on a projector over the table. The image taken during the combat training was a bit blurry, zoomed in, but she could still make out faint splotches and lines on Izuku's skin, blindingly white against Izuku's pale skin. Tears poured down Inko's face as she took in the image, blurring the scars even more. When? She asked, her voice hoarse. When did this happen? I got a closer look at his scars when he came into my office, Shuzenji said. They all look years old, and though I can't be sure, it looks like they all happened at different times. As best as I can guess, this has been happening for a long time. The nurse made a grim expression and said bitterly, They don't look self-inflicted. Someone did this to him. Who? Why? We don't know, Nezu said. I've been reviewing school records, but Aldera didn't have anything on record. It will take time, but I'm working on getting access to their security footage. Inko could barely speak from how tight her throat had become. She couldn't see anymore, blinded by her tears. How did I not know about this? She wailed, sobbing into her arm. How could I be so stupid? Shuzenji hopped out of her chair and went to Inko's side. You too, she snapped at Nezu and Aizawa. Out. We'll be next door, Nezu said. Take as much time as you need, Midoriya-san. When they were alone, Recovery Girl pulled a chair over next to Inko. She sat next to her, patting her shoulder while she sobbed into the table. Everything will be okay, Midoriya-san. We will do everything we can for your son. How did I not know? He had scars all over his arm and back for God knows how long, and I never even noticed them. How? Do you think he was hiding them on purpose? Inko sniffed and wiped her face. He had to have. He always wore long shirts, no matter how hot it was. He always said he hated swimming. How did I miss all that? It's all right, dearie, you didn't know. Nobody's perfect. There's nothing you could have done if he didn't let you know about his problems. But why? Inko grabbed Shuzenji by the shoulders. Her eyes were flooding with fresh tears. Why didn't he tell me? Did he think I wouldn't care? Did he think I wouldn't believe him or do anything about it? I don't know, Recovery Girl said. That's something you'll have to find out from your son. Inko's shoulders sagged. I did this. When he got the diagnosis, he asked me if he could still be a hero. I just apologized. I couldn't even tell him that he could still have his dream. I couldn't. I was so worried about what would happen to him. And if I had been more supportive, if I helped him become a hero like he always dreamed, maybe he would have trusted me. Maybe he would have told me all this was happening. Inko grew nearly incomprehensible as her chest shook from all the sobbing. Maybe it wouldn't have even happened in the first place. You weren't wrong, Midoriya-san. Hero work is dangerous. Your son came in a few days ago with 2 broken fingers. I'm guessing he didn't tell you that either. Inko's stricken countenance was all the answer Shuzenji needed. The elderly woman shook her head. It's a common enough occurrence during training. Burns, cuts, broken bones, concussions, sprains, you name it, I've seen it in my office. We try to limit it, but fact is, they need to be exposed to that danger beforehand, or the real world will chew them up. Hero work isn't glamorous, it isn't a cozy life. It's a life of hardship and sacrifice, one that isn't easy for anyone, even those with powerful quirks. If I hadn't seen what Midoriya was capable of for myself, I would have insisted that he be transferred to general study. Even now, I still can't believe he's here. I don't even know how I did it. How awful is that? I should have been there to support him, and instead, he had to do all this on his own. No wonder he never told me anything. Inko buried her face in Shuzenji's shoulder, drenching her coat. She cried like that for 15 minutes, while Recovery Girl patted her back and muttered softly to her. I'm sorry, Inko said as she pulled away. I shouldn't have. It's quite all right. Shuzenji rummaged around in her pocket and took out a gummy. Here, eat one. You'll feel better. Inko stared numbly at the green teddy bear between her fingers. She popped it in her mouth, grimacing at the sickly sweet apple flavor. When she swallowed it, a surge of energy spread through her, making her feel a little less like death. Thank you, she said, her voice trembling as she held back another round of sobs. You're going through all this trouble just for me. I don't feel like I deserve it. That's what heroes are for, Shuzenji said with a warm smile. We help whoever and however we can. Don't worry about not being worth it, because you are. You care about your son. And because of that, I know the two of you will be okay. Inko took a deep breath and wrung her hands together. Thank you, Shuzenji-san. I don't know what to do next. Where do I even begin? Well, we have a counselor on staff for situations like this. If you would like, we can talk to Nezu and see if we can set up an appointment. We also have psychiatrists we can contact, but it may take a while before they can see your son. The counselor sounds perfect. Inko wiped her face on her sleeve, grimacing when some of her makeup stained the fabric. I'm a mess. Don't worry about that. I have some powder you can borrow. It's fine. I'm just heading home anyways, but thank you. Shuzenji poured Inko another cup of tea. Should I go get Nezu? Please. Inko barely had time for a sip before everyone was back. She tried her best to stay in control of herself, but she knew she looked like a mess from the pained expression on Aizawa's face. From what I understand, you wish to set up an appointment with the school's counselor? Correct. When Inko nodded, the principal said, I can get you in as early as next Monday, after school. Will that be all right? It will. She had worked that day for both jobs. But the thought didn't even cross her mind. Thank you so much. Anytime, Midoriya-san. Is there anything else we can help you with? No, you've done so much already. I'll be fine. Thank you. Aizawa-san can take you to the entrance. I'll send you an email to confirm the appointment and tell you when to arrive. Gathering up her things, Inko said her goodbyes to Nezu and Shuzenji before following Aizawa out of the room. This time, the pro-hero walked more slowly, looking behind him once in a while with a concerned expression. Each time they came to a corner, he made sure no one was in the hallways. The path was a different one, winding past large, closed-off buildings and open fields. When they arrived at a small gate at the rear of the school, Aizawa paused. This is the back entrance. After all that, I figured you wouldn't want to deal with all the vultures lurking outside the school. It took Inko a few moments to realize that Aizawa meant the reporters. Yes, thank you. I don't think I want to end up in a newspaper looking like this. Aizawa smiled, but it was strained. I am so sorry for everything you and your son have been through. He pulled up a sleeve, revealing a few scars of his own. I know what it's like. Will he be okay? Inko asked. He's a tough kid, and honestly, he has the potential to be an amazing hero. He had a determined gleam in his eye when he said, I'll make sure of it. I wish I had seen it sooner. If I had, it's not your fault. That much, I'm sure of. He scowled and added, if anything, it's whichever incompetent idiot was running his prep school for letting it get this bad. If any students at UA try to harass him, I'll see to it that they are expelled at the minimum. Good. I could tell that his old teachers never really cared. But I didn't think there was anything I could do about it. I'm glad he finally has a good teacher. Wiping away a stray tear, she said, thank you, and have a good day, Aizawa-san. When Izuku came home, Inko almost confronted him on the spot. Seeing the long sleeves of his school uniform, knowing what was hiding beneath them, brought fresh tears to her eyes, but she wiped them away before her son could see. You know, she said shakily, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I didn't believe you could be a hero, but you did it. You made it to UA. And I want you to know, I'll do whatever I can to support your dream. She didn't know how she expected her son to react, but his indifferent nod felt like the cruelest answer possible. Thanks, Mom. I'm glad you think so. Izuku went to his room, training some more, from the sound of stomping feet and heavy breathing behind his door. 1 week, she just had to pull through for 1 week. And they could sort this all out. It had taken her far too long, but she finally got the help her son needed. Nezu had another conference room waiting when Recovery Girl kicked them both out. Nezu reached for his cup, only to find he had left it in the other room. What a bother, he said idly. I hope it doesn't get cold before we go back. Aizawa took a seat and folded his arms. I thought we weren't going to approach his mother. She approached me. Good thing she did. I had thought that she was helping her son hide his quirk. But I see now that she's as in the dark as we are. Is that good or bad? Nezu grimaced. Very bad. The fact that he managed to keep those scars a secret from his own mother for so long speaks to how well he can hide things. And it also points to possible trust issues. Getting Izuku to admit he has a quirk, let alone confide the details of its use and limitations, will be nearly impossible. Aizawa drummed his fingers on the table, looking down with an uneasy countenance. I feel bad for her. We dropped one hell of a bombshell on her, and we still haven't told her about his mystery quirk. I'm afraid we won't be doing that today. An edge crept into Aizawa's voice. Why not? For one, all our evidence is circumstantial. While we could use Tsukachi to resolve the matter, the situation's too delicate for such a hammer, so to speak. Second, if Midoriya-kun were to catch wind of our suspicions, it may make him flee, considering that he has an information-based quirk of equal or greater magnitude of my own. With unknown function and characteristics, I shudder to imagine how difficult it would be to track him down. He could disappear entirely. Or worse yet, team up with villains. So, what are we going to do? We can't tell his mother, we can't confront him, all we're doing is waiting for something to happen. What are we even waiting for? More information. I've been keeping tabs on Midoriya-kun's activity, and what I've seen so far is worrying. His behavior has been highly out of character since starting classes at UA. His academic performance has greatly improved, and he's socializing far more than the limited information I've gotten from Alder would suggest, going so far as to meet with multiple classmates off campus. For the past 3 days, he has gone out with 3 members of the class, Todoroki, Ajiro, and Ashido. Of those, both Ajiro and Ashido filed requests for new support gear today. On a hunch, I decided to ask them where they got the ideas for their gear, and both of them told me that it was Midoriya's idea. He's known in his class for his thorough quirk analysis, Aizawa said. It's no surprise that his classmates would want his advice. True, but Ajiro had a more interesting tale to tell. He had insisted on not using equipment at all, but Midoriya warned him that if he didn't, someone would die. Aizawa leaned forward, thinking the implications of what Nezu said. So, is it a predictive quirk after all? Possible. Again, there's not much we know. What worries me is why his behavior has radically changed. Nezu scratched at the side of his face as his attention wandered. If he was worried we suspected he had a quirk, the last thing he would do is draw attention to himself, which means there has to be something else going on. Whatever the reason, I fear we'll find out soon enough. Worried by Nezu's tone of voice, Aizawa decided to change the subject. Have you figured anything out about his quirk? Nothing so far. However, Midoriya-san gave us a good hint. The change in emotions. Exactly. I'd wager that it marks the activation of his quirk. Whatever it is, it caused a significant change to his emotional state. All the more reason to get him counseling, Aizawa said grimly. I know you didn't want to single him out, but after hearing this, I agree, and I think today will give us a wonderful opportunity to make it happen. Aizawa blinked in surprise. You're going to suggest it to her? I will. I'd like to think that it would be enough to get Midoriya-kun to open up to us, but I doubt we'd be so lucky. It will be enough to at least get a better understanding of his emotional state. In time, that might help us solve this riddle. As it turned out, Recovery Girl had already suggested counseling, and Midoriya and Co had enthusiastically agreed. To Aizawa's relief, they finally had a set date for a counseling session. They finally had the chance to help such a promising student. Considering how disheveled Midoriya-san appeared, Aizawa led her out the back, making sure no one saw her. Before parting ways with her, he tried to reassure her as best as he could. From the sad smile on her face, he felt it might have been enough. It tore at his heart, knowing that they were hiding Izuku's quirk from her. For a moment, he felt tempted to tell her what he knew, but he couldn't deny Nezu's logic. He watched in silence as Midoriya and Co walked the winding, lonely path back to the school's parking lot. Hey, and today feels like a game of Russian roulette. I'm on call for work for 4 hours before my shift starts, and I'm praying I don't get that call. I don't think I will, but if I do, today's gonna suck. This chapter overall was a little on the shorter side, but I felt that adding more would make it feel bloated. Hopefully, the extra little bit after this will make up for it. Speaking of that, as the notice said, an excerpt for material added to Chapter 2 was added. I've been debating for a while now whether or not to add an extra drawback to Izuku's quirk, and finalizing certain scenes made up my mind. As much as I don't like changing things once they're written, I felt that this was important enough to break that rule. To Yamagichi, it'd be pretty cruel of Izuku to leave someone hanging when he knows he's going to kick the bucket in a week. To Dace 22, part of the editing I did was to make it clearer what Izuku's new fate would be. It's only changed because Aizawa messed with his quirk. Hope that helps. To him the person, I feel that I'm going to have my hands full just with 1A. They'll be around, but not a major part of the story. At least, that's the plan for now. Lord knows half my writing is done by the seat of my pants. To Elk, I'm glad you feel I'm doing a great job with the characters. I intended for there to be diversity of opinions to drive more interpersonal conflicts later on. Everyone agreeing and being nice is too boring. To Demon Kitty Angel, looks like someone has a precognitive quirk of their own. Kudos. Chapter 2, Blackout, we're right. Izuku could feel himself breaking on the inside. As his future crept outward, he was 5 again, rolling on the floor as 10 years of bull. and a death by suffocation played out while the All Might video played on loop above him. 2 fingers on his left hand snapped, and he could feel shards of bone grinding against one another as he moved his hand. Izuku choked on his scream, desperate to break away from the crowd before the pain got worse. He took the out his quirk showed him. I need to use the restroom. Is that okay? Eraserhead studied him carefully, with an emotion on his face that Izuku couldn't read. Make it quick. We have work to do. Yes, sir. Izuku sprinted to the nearest restroom, locked the stall, and collapsed onto the toilet seat. Sobs broke out of him, and tears ran down his face as the future spread outward. A dull echo of the pain from breaking fingers lingered in his left hand, and his right itched from a burn. As his future crept outward, exhaustion deadened his muscles, making him too weak to move. Each day of his new future weakened him, until he felt a bone-deep exhaustion that made him want to close his eyes. The panic he had held back with everything he had came rushing in full force, a feeling of helplessness and confusion from having his entire future ripped out from under him like a tablecloth. He couldn't imagine how people could live like that, not knowing what their every action would entail, how to speak, how to act, where to walk, every minute detail laid out for him in a picture-perfect script. The anger and fear of the present grappled with the exhaustion of the future, sending his heart into an arrhythmic patter. The future had changed. Again, he still wasn't sure what had happened the first time, but this time, his quirk had been erased. For just a moment, he couldn't see what he was supposed to do. He had messed up. He had given into panic. And now, Eraserhead knew he had a quirk Izuku wasn't supposed to show him, and somehow, it had changed what was supposed to happen. Anger simmered inside Izuku. For the first time in his life, he felt that he could hate a hero. Even Endeavor, for all his sour attitude and rudeness, could be respected for his tireless efforts to apprehend villains. But his teacher changed his mind about how much Izuku was worth because he had a quirk. He was supposed to expel him. Bottom of the class, quirkless, weak loser he was. The only thing that could have changed his mind was his quirk. It explained the sudden shift in his future perfectly. As he huddled into a ball on the toilet, chest bursting with anger and hysteria, his new death came to him. A swirling black void, villains on a ship, a nightmarish monster with unfocused eyes, a hand reaching for him from darkness, the classmates and heroes gathered at the center plaza, safe, the villains ready to retreat. Izuku felt his skull ripping itself apart. Each fleck of skin, flesh, and bone that turned to dust drove another lance of pain through his head. Izuku stuffed a hand in his mouth, stifling the scream that tore itself from his throat. After what felt like an eternity, the pain stopped. Izuku picked himself up off the bathroom floor with shaking arms, breathing deeply. Tooth marks bit painfully into his hand, almost drawing blood, but the pain was distant, numbed by his having felt it already. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to prepare before villains will attack his school and try to kill his classmates and his teacher. He didn't have time to cry. He washed his face in the sink and let his hair hang low to hide his puffy, red eyes. On his way back to class, he took a detour to the library and checked out a book on sign language. Izuku hoped that, this time, that the future wouldn't change on him. Katsuki felt like a pot of boiling water with the lid clamped shut. He felt Deku's eyes on him wherever he went, in the lunchroom, in the hallways, even when he was checking his phone in the bathroom. Swearing came easily to him, Katsuki's way of showing the world that he meant fucking business. Now, every time he started one, a jolt of fear held his tongue. Even at home, even when locked away in his room, even when Deku shouldn't possibly be able to overhear him, he couldn't bring himself to swear. He knew he was being stupid. He knew he was being weak. But if all it took was one swear to cost him his rightful place as the #1 hero, he'd never swear again for the rest of his life, no matter how much like a fucking wimp it made him feel. So, he kept the lid on his anger and sucked up to Kaminari and Mainta. It was easier said than done. They both regarded him like a rabid dog at first, glancing uneasily at one another when he asked to sit next to them. It was only natural. They were too weak to handle him. So, he had to roll over and show those pitiful puppies his belly, wag his tail, smile, ask nicely, and play the meek, pitiful little Pomeranian that Deku wanted him to be. It had taken mentioning that he played the drums to get Kaminari to open up. The dunce was into rock music and wanted to play the bass. Mainta had volunteered to be lead singer, salivating over all the chicks he'd score once they started a band. It took all of Katsuki's discipline to keep from strangling him right then and there. As the days wore on, Kaminari and Mainta gradually warmed up to him. Katsuki endured their discussions of girls, music, and video games, pretending to be engaged. It wasn't hard. His ear for the drums led him to multiple rock bands, and it was always fun to crush virtual villains in a video game. But the idle conversation made him feel as though he was wasting time, when he could have instead read through the textbooks or clobbered a training dummy at one of the gyms. As if it wasn't enough that he had to suck up to the hero course's lowlives, he had to watch Deku surround himself with half the class, as if to prove to Katsuki that he could surpass him in the lunchroom as well. Each day, he'd have someone different sitting next to him, making hand gestures with signs, having raccoon eyes lean on his shoulder to look at his hero notes, swapping baked goods with lips, or just sitting in silence with the human thermostat. Deku's table was the center of the room, with the rest of the hero students orbiting around him, while Katsuki was out in the middle of fucking nowhere, right next to the useless Gen Ed students and their creepy, muttering business-minded twins. Per Izuku's instructions, Katsuki asked his two reluctant companions if they wanted to hit up the arcades. Their hesitation died the moment he waved Izuku's crisp 5,000 yen note in front of their faces. By the next day, they both confirmed that it was all right with their parents. Katsuki took them to an arcade on the other side of town. The last thing he wanted was to run into his old classmates. He had heard that the place was more expensive, but worth the price. As he walked past row after row of arcade cabinets, all looking as fresh as when they rolled off the factory floor, he reluctantly agreed it was better than his old haunt. Kaminari took the lead, steering them towards an on-the-rails shooter with room for 4. Mock villains held gagged civilians hostage as they made their way floor by floor, shooting flames, feathers, and denim strands in obvious homage to top heroes. Kaminari had terrible aim, roasting as many civilians as villains, and Minda was a touch too short to reach over the console, leaving him shooting feathers towards the top of the screen. Katsuki had to work overtime, flinging denim left and right to leave villains comically hogtied with their own clothes. Miraculously, they made it to the final boss fight on the roof. Muscular, mechanical eye leering at them, muscles bulging out of his skin, laughed at them as he stomped onto the screen. Nondescript fallen heroes littered the scene, beaten into walls or left lying on the floor. They had to target bulges in his arms and legs, stopping him from throwing punches and softening him up until his eye was exposed. After a few shots to the eye, he'd go back to guarding it, rinsing and repeating until he hit the floor. Hell yeah, Kaminari shouted. That's what I'm talking about. With a target half the size of the screen, Kaminari still found a way to roast the heroes in the background. Minda at least proved his worth in stopping the overhead punches and going for the eye, but Katsuki barely blocked the kicks on his own. As tempted as he was to point out how useless they were, Katsuki couldn't risk Deku taking offense to the ordered trip to the arcade being cut short. Next to catch their attention was a 2-player fighting game. Minda bowed out, taking the opportunity to ogle a girl leaning over a pinball machine. While Katsuki and Kaminari picked characters, Katsuki went for Endeavor, but Kaminari beat him to it. Sorry, man, he's my main. All Might was selectable, but the one rule of any fighting game was to never pick All Might. Whether it was Street Heroes or Hero Brawl, All Might was always the opus character, tanking every hit and punching like an 18-wheeler in return, moving far too fast for a heavy hitter to boot. Hawks always had a terrible matchup against Fire, so instead, Katsuki settled for Best Jeanist. Kaminari took an early lead, roasting Katsuki with a long-range barrage. But once Katsuki got a hang of the controls, he darted through an opening and landed a punishing combo. Not letting up the pressure, Katsuki pressed Kaminari's character against a wall until his health bar emptied. "Oh, I thought I had you," Kaminari complained as he fed more money into the machine. "Hey, Minda, you're up." Not wanting to learn another control scheme, Katsuki stuck with Best Jeanist while Minda went with Mirko, surprisingly competent at the game. Minda leapt behind Katsuki and dealt a powerful kick, knocking Best Jeanist into a stack of crates. From there, it was a slaughter, as Minda strung combo after combo while Katsuki struggled to get a hit in. The whole battle left Katsuki in a fit of apoplectic rage. Minda smirked at Katsuki, but his giddiness evaporated before the fire in Katsuki's eyes. With a panicked glance at Kaminari, Minda swallowed and said, "Good game, Katsuki. You did great." "Like hell I did," Katsuki snapped. Any other time, he'd have shown Minda his place, but he couldn't, not when Deku might hear about it. Taking a deep breath, Katsuki said, "Kick Kaminari's ass so we can move on to something else." Kaminari was thoroughly trounced, with Mirko smirking under the flawless victory screenshot, one foot on Endeavor's chest as he lay unconscious on the street. The next game to catch their attention was the dance pad. This one with room for 4. Minda argued for one with busty girls dancing in the background, but Katsuki swiftly vetoed him, settling for a hero-themed song. Once again, fate left him with impeccable styled Best Jeanist, dancing with a soulless stare. Kaminari, to his joy, got Endeavor glaring as he two-stepped, while Minda scowled at Edshot folding himself as he twirled. Yet again, Minda proved himself better than he had any right to be, practically leaping between each button on the floor. But this time, Katsuki gave as good as he got, matching the smaller teen step for step. Kaminari, meanwhile, got hopelessly left behind, the crowd booing as red lights blared around Endeavor. Not even half the song went by before he got the game over screen. As the dance wound to a close, Minda's eyes darted between the two scores, making a quick calculation on his odds of surviving another victory. Minda fumbled the last few steps, lowering his score just enough for Katsuki to pull ahead. Noticing the intentional fumble, Katsuki glowered as the screen announced his victory and Best Jeanist stiffly bowed to the invisible audience. Next time, Katsuki growled, "Don't hold back." "Got it. I'm not going to take some lame-ass victory." Sure, got it," Minda hastily said as sweat dripped down his face. As they made their way back around the arcade, the rock hero setup caught Kaminari's eyes. He dragged Katsuki and Minda over, claiming the bass while Minda scooped up the microphone. Katsuki settled into the drummer's seat and gave the light, plastic sticks an experimental flip. They were attached to the rest of the set with wires, but he could tap out a beat well enough. Predictably, Minda went for a song from a high-profile all-female band, but Kaminari and Katsuki both shot down the easier pop song. Kaminari steered them towards a higher difficulty hard rock song. Nodding his head a few times to the beat, Katsuki drummed out his part, missing the occasional tap when the wires got tangled, but quickly getting the hang of it. Kaminari tackled the awkward fingerings and fast strumming with ease, not dropping a single note as he jammed out on the cheap plastic controller. Minda, while singing at the right intervals to score in the game, had a voice that made nails on a chalkboard sound like an orchestral symphony. His voice screeched and groaned like a saw cutting a block of iron in half. Puberty had clearly kicked his voice box in the balls, but from the way he winked at two passing girls, he had no idea how terrible he was. With their high score, the game offered them an encore. Katsuki grabbed Minda by the scruff of the neck and plopped him in front of the guitar, telling him on no uncertain terms that if he ever tried to sing in his presence again, he'd personally see to it that the balls below his waist would be the same color as the ones he had for hair, and added that it might bring his pitch high enough so it'd be inaudible to the human ear. Suitably subdued, Minda strummed the guitar while the computer took over the vocals. Minda's fingers were too short for the more complex fingerings, but they were able to limp their way to a second finish of the song. Thoroughly gamed out, Kaminari and Minda drifted over to the ticket games, mindlessly mashing buttons and pulling levers to squeeze tickets out of the machine. Katsuki went over to the skee ball. Years of practice let him sink all but one of the balls in the highest point target in the top left corner. A few fistfuls of tickets later, Kaminari had a temporary endeavor tattoo. Minda was nursing a nosebleed and clutching a mini midnight doll, cleavage and skimpy costume included. And Katsuki had a wad of candy to gnaw on while studying for the night. The games alone had wrung out Deku's 5,000 yen, and they hadn't even gotten food, not that Katsuki would complain. He'd sooner fork over his entire wallet than grovel at Deku's feet for more spending money. The arcade had a dining area off to the side, bedecked with hero paraphernalia from the hottest new heroes. A full-sized replica of All Might's costume hung behind glass in one corner, along with a sign, framed photograph of Hawks with his sidekick, a pair of jeans signed by Best Jeanist, and a box of Wash's favorite detergent. The menu featured greasy food of all kinds, from takoyaki and karaage to cheese curds and French fries. Minda and Kaminari argued back and forth over what to get, but once Katsuki got fed up with listening to them squabble, he ordered them all pizza. They got a table with a good view of the television, and to Minda's joy, a table of 4 chicks just far enough away to not notice him creepily staring at their chests. Kaminari started a conversation about what kinds of songs they would play if they got a band together. Minda half listened, throwing out apathetic comments as he kept his eyes on the other table. When the pizza finally arrived, Katsuki regretted not coming sooner. A cheesy, greasy aroma wafted from the pizza, mingled with the scent of oregano and fennel in the sausage. He pulled a slice towards him, smiling in appreciation of the thick, gooey strands of cheese that stretched out as he brought the slice closer to his mouth. The crust was thin and crunchy, the sauce tangy, the cheese divine. Even Minda was roused from his perverted thoughts, pausing to stuff his face full of pizza before turning back around. The girls eventually noticed Minda's peeping, though how it took them half a pizza for them to get around to scolding Minda was beyond Katsuki. He watched the trouble unfold, first as startled glances at Minda, then hushed whispers upset and angry enough to reach Katsuki's ears. Finally, one of the girls stood, drink in hand, walked over to their table, and towered over Minda. Her fingernails glittered with flecks of silver, though whether it was nail polish or a quirk was anyone's guess. "Excuse me," she said in a snippy voice, "but it's rude to stare. Please stop." Minda gave his biggest shit-eating grin, much to Katsuki's inward exasperation. "Sorry, but I couldn't help myself, not when you've got such a nice rack." Katsuki rolled his eyes, swearing internally. Judging by the scowl and embarrassed flush on the girl's face, that comment did not have the intended effect on the girl. She drew herself up even higher, using every inch of her heels to look down on Minda. "You're such a pervert. Leave us alone before I tell the manager." Minda's smile faltered, but even though he had already hit rock bottom, he was determined to dig himself even deeper. "Hey, don't be like that." He squeezed one of the balls on his head and said, Why don't you take a seat next to me? I'll let you touch my balls." The girl's eye twitched in agitation. She appended her drink over Minta's head, spilling it all over his bulbous hair. The liquid ran off, not leaving a single drop on Minta's head, but splashing onto his shirt and the table. "Here's what I think of your stupid little balls. I wouldn't come near you if you were the last boy on earth." She gave a snarky laugh and said, "Try again when you've grown 2 feet and don't look like someone stuck balloons on a clown. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get the manager." Not wanting to deal with the manager, or worse, end up with Minta being expelled for sexual harassment, Katsuki quickly stood up. "Excuse my idiot of a friend. He's really desperate because of the way he looks. Leave the manager out of it, and I'll make sure he doesn't bother you again." Minta gaped open-mouthed at him, alternating between anger and worry at Katsuki's ominous tone. The girl sneered at him. "Oh please, I bet you were checking us out too, you pervert." Anger boiled up in Katsuki's veins. As tempting as it was to call her a bitch, Deku's threat held him back. He felt the window for a comeback closing, and in a moment of desperation, he said, "Nah, I'm not impressed. There's way better in my class, and she's far less shy about hiding what she's got. Probably because she doesn't have to wear a padded bra." Kaminari hooted in laughter as the girl sputtered and glared at him. His outburst had even caused a stir at the girl's table. "Oh yeah," the girl said, sputtering. "Well, I bet she gives such a show because she's a slut." Katsuki shrugged. "So what if she is? Not like I care." The girl was spinning her wheels at this point, but she was determined not to lose ground. And I bet even then, she won't let a dirty asshole like you anywhere near her." "Where did you get those clothes? Walmart?" The girl's own clothes seemed expensive, if the tacky design was anything to go by. Katsuki surreptitiously dug a finger into one of the pizza slices, coating his finger in a dollop of pizza sauce. "At least I don't get mine out of the dumpster out back." The girl gasped, and her face reached an even deeper shade of crimson. "I'll have you know, this shirt is an Uebami line top and cost over 20,000 yen. I bet it's worth more than your entire wardrobe." Katsuki flung the sauce while she went on about how valuable her shirt was. The dollop landed just above her waistline, and she didn't notice. Kaminari bit his lip, stifling another bout of laughter after he saw what Katsuki did. "Really?" Katsuki asked once the girl was finally done. "I figured it was a cheap shirt since you got sauce all over it." "Good for you." The girl's eyes widened as she looked down, finally noticing the gob of sauce. She clenched her hand, and her nails grew visibly longer and sharper. "You did this, didn't you?" she asked, holding up the shirt to the light. Minta leaned down, trying to peek up her shirt. To avoid further trouble, Katsuki flicked him on the forehead, forcing him to sit upright. "And waste perfectly good pizza sauce on someone like you?" Katsuki asked as he wiped his finger clean on his pants. "Wouldn't dream of it. Now, I suggest you get that cleaned off right away. Tomato stains are hard to get out of clothes." The girl's eyes darted between Katsuki's hands, which were greasy but not stained with sauce, and Minta, who was rubbing his forehead where Katsuki had flicked it. With an irritated huff, the girl turned and strode towards the bathrooms. The other girls left their table and followed after her. Once the girls were gone, Kaminari let out the laughter he had been holding back. "Dude, that was awesome. Way to show her who's boss." Minta, on the other hand, was ill-pleased by the turn of events. "Hey, why did you have to butt in? I was getting my moves on." Katsuki loomed over him and gave him his best irritate me one more time and you die scowl. "Those girls had every right to call you out, and I'm impressed they had the balls to confront you about it. If they hadn't been such snobs and called me a pervert, I would have probably let you get in trouble. Heck, I would have even helped them." Katsuki really hoped that Deku didn't consider heck a swear. And if he did, then what the hell did he expect from him? "Still, though, that was really cool," Kaminari said. "I could barely keep from laughing while she was going on about her shirt when you got sauce on it. Whatever, let's finish up and get out of here before they get back. I don't feel like getting kicked out of this place." They each took a slice, washed it down with the last of their sodas, and made a beeline for the door. As they left, Katsuki caught sight of the girls leaving the bathroom. The one with glittering nails glared at him before turning away. It was still early in the day, and Katsuki was worried Deku would take offense if he called off the arcade trip early. So when they came across a park and an ice cream stand, he suggested taking a seat at a bench. Not ones to turn down free food, Minta and Kaminari accepted the ice cream bribe. They sat down with their frozen treats and watched people walk by. "Hey Bakugo-san," Kaminari said once he finished his ice cream. "Mind if I ask you a question?" "Shoot, why did you start hanging out with us?" Minta's attention was pulled away from the woman he was watching. Katsuki felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Katsuki asked, hoping to buy time and think of a better answer than "Deku blackmailed me into hanging out with you two losers." Kaminari looked away and nervously scratched the back of his neck. "Well, the first couple days of school, you were, well, how should I put it? An asshole," Minta said, bracing for Katsuki's imminent anger. Kaminari cringed, but he didn't contradict Minta's words. "Well, you swore at basically everyone, called us all extras. and tried to murder the first student you fought against. Well, I think so, anyways. Not really sure what happened there. Then, one day, that all, I dunno, went away. It's not like you were a completely different person, just different. Kaminari sighed and tossed the soggy ice cream wrapper in the garbage. I don't know, it's just weird. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know what's going through your head or why you're hanging out with us. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad you invited us out and I had a great time, I just want to know why. He couldn't tell them the truth, and he doubted an outright lie would hold up. As Kaminari struggled to put his thoughts together, Katsuki pieced together exactly what he could tell them. I got some advice, Katsuki said carefully, about how I could be a better hero. They suggested that I find someone to hang out with, and, well, they suggested you too. Katsuki cringed at his own words and waited for their reaction. Kaminari blinked, taken aback by the answer, and looked down at the paved path. Well, he said with a nervous chuckle, I don't know what I was expecting, but it definitely wasn't that. Yeah, Minda shouted. You used us. Katsuki cringed and felt his blood boil at his reaction. It wasn't his fault that Deku was making him do this. What the hell did they want from him? Kaminari took a deep breath. Well, I mean, I guess I don't mind. You did just treat us to arcades, lunch, and ice cream. And, well, it's not really a bad thing that you're trying to reach out to people, even if someone told you to. Kaminari looked at Katsuki and smiled. You were honest about it too. You could have just lied or gave a vague reason. And instead, you told us the truth. You're really not mad. Nah, explains a lot. Kaminari smirked. They also told you not to swear, didn't they? Katsuki scowled and asked, how do you know that? I dunno. Maybe it's because you have to stop yourself from swearing every sentence. Kaminari tentatively put a hand on his shoulder. Katsuki frowned at it but didn't shove it off. Look, it's weird, and I don't know how to feel about this whole thing, but you're clearly working hard to be a better person. I guess, well, I don't mind being your friend. You're not easy to hang around with, but you know how to rock, and the way you stood up to that chick was awesome. You don't have pay to get me to hang out with you. In fact, next time's on us. Us? Minda asked. Kaminari elbowed him in the ribs hard enough to make him double over. Yes, us, unless you feel like sitting alone at lunch. Minda scowled, rubbing his bruised ribs, and said, fine, next one's on us. I still don't like it, but I guess it's fine. Kaminari said, let's not talk about this again, alright? From here on, we're friends, and that's that. Deal, Katsuki-san. Kaminari held out his hand, waiting for Katsuki to take it. Katsuki didn't know how to react to the sudden kind gesture. Half of him raged at the weakling taking pity on him, playing the part of being friends for his sake, and the other half was confused, didn't understand why Kaminari wasn't angry, didn't push him away for basically using him, like Minda said. As Kaminari's smile faltered, Katsuki took his hand and awkwardly shook it. Deal, Katsuki said through gritted teeth. 1 second, the whole world dropped away, leaving Mashirao floating in a black void. The next, reality was back, only everything was on fire. For one confused second, Mashirao wondered what he had done to deserve being kicked straight to hell. No waiting in line for St. Peter's judgment. A knife darted out of the flames. Mashirao did a wing block out of reflex, stepped into his attacker and laid him out with a well-aimed punch. More attackers rushed at Mashirao from the fires. He crouched into a familiar stance and took a deep breath, instantly regretting it when smoke filled his lungs. As he coughed, the villains ran forward, only for a string of tape to stop them short. Ajiro-san, over here. Hanta called through the flames. He tugged, forcing the group of villains to stumble back before one slashed the binding. Takoyami was with him, fending off another villain with a shrunken dark shadow. Using the opening, Mashirao ran towards them and helped Dark Shadow bring down the villains. Where are we? Mashirao asked. Still in the USJ, I think, Hanta said. 13 did say something about a conflagration zone. Takoyami put himself between the other students and wrapped Dark Shadow around them, holding the villains at bay. We should head back to the center, like Midoriya said. Quills flew out from the flames. Dark Shadow rose to block them, but some make it past, piercing Takoyami's cloak. As light crept in through the holes in the cloak, Dark Shadow grew smaller and weaker. Are you hurt? Hanta asked, unrolling his tape. Ajiro-san, keep them off us, I can bandage him up. I'm not hit, Takoyami said, but my cloak's ruined. There was a short pause as the avian teen went through an internal struggle. His next words sound as though they were forced out of him. Dark Shadow gets weaker in light, and without the cloak, I can't do anything. Here, let me patch it up. While Takoyami and Hanta were distracted with cloak repairs, the quill villain stepped out of the flames, arms aimed at them, with enough quills bristling from his hands and forearms to turn Mashirao's classmates into pincushion. Unable to breathe from fear, Mashirao rummaged in his gi's improvised pockets. His hands closed around the bola, a last-minute addition to his hero attire. It was a graceless throw, but one end of the capture weapon struck the villain in the head. They reeled back, quills firing wildly into the air and striking another villain. cloak repaired, Takoyami sent Dark Shadow after the quill-bearing villain, bringing him down before he could fire more quills. The fighting grew hectic after that, villains closing around. Takoyami holding down the hasty tape job on his cloak, Hanta smearing moisturizer on his elbows to keep his tape from drying out, and Mashurao fighting wave after wave of villains until his arms grew heavy. When they finally made it out of the fires, the first thing Mashurao saw was Midoriya, face bleeding as a gray-haired villain dug his hand into his skull. Mashurao reached into his gi, but he was all out of bola to throw. Ochako was no stranger to nausea. There was the ever-familiar "I used my quirk, too much stomach pain." The "I used my quirk on myself and now I don't know which way is up" feeling that made her stomach do flipped. The "I ate 2-week-old leftovers at the back of my fridge because wasting food equals wasting money" stomach cramps that would have made her call a hospital if that wouldn't have made her parents worry and maybe drag her back home. And because that apparently wasn't enough, she got the "my body hates me and craves death" version once a month just for kicks. Now, she had a new type to add to her list. The "I'm trapped in a shadowy vacuum and my stomach wants to fill the void" variety she hoped never to experience again. When the void vomited her back into reality, it was to find herself surrounded by villains in a maze of crumbling architecture, making herself half her weight, a trick she really had to thank Midoriya for suggesting. Ochako leapt 10 feet into the air and landed nimbly onto a cracked archway. A villain came after her, but the weathered stone couldn't support their combined weight. Rocks fell to the ground, scattering the villains around her. Ochako used the opportunity to leap higher. A glint of light from Aoyama's armor caught her eye, and she sprinted towards it. The flamboyant teen had his own bout of stomach pain, struggling to stand after firing his laser in a circle around him. The uneven terrain was keeping the villains at a distance, but Aoyama didn't have long before they made it close enough to stab him. Neither Ochako nor the villains were the first to make it to Aoyama's side. Leaping nimbly over the fallen rocks, Shoji ran in front of Aoyama and spread out his dupli arms. The first villain to reach him was sent sprawling by a 3-pronged punch. "Is there anyone else here?" Ochako asked when she made it to them. "It's just the 3 of us in this zone," Shoji said, "against 15 villains." Still doubled over and nursing an aching stomach, Aoyama shakily said, "I don't think we can take that many. And I can't carry both of you at the same time. Otherwise, we could just run away. What if I made us all half as light?" Ochako asked. "Try carrying me." Shoji hefted her and blinked at how light she was. "I can work with this." With Aoyama and Ochako tucked under his dupli arms, Shoji ran towards the center of the USJ building. Without his dupli arms to act as secondary ears, he didn't notice the pair of villains that swung around in front of him. They were moving at either side of him, planning to cut him off at a sturdy section of wall. Shoji skidded to a halt and spread out some ears. "We can't stop and fight. There's more right behind us. Any ideas?" Ochako prodded Aoyama. "Is your stomach better yet?" But I only have 1 shot. Fire it at the ground. We're going to fly out of here." As the villains closed around them, Ochako took a deep breath, steeling herself for the nausea to come. She tapped herself and her 2 classmates, negating the rest of their gravity. Shoji jumped, putting them out of reach of the villains' reach. As the few long-range villains fired metal spheres and gobs of sludge at them, Aoyama fired his laser, launching them across the facility. They landed in a heap near Yaoyorozu and Jiru, closer to the entrance, just in time to watch Midoriya shove a Matryoshka doll into a villain's exposed brain. It wasn't clear at first what that was supposed to accomplish, but as smoke rose from the villain's head, the villain's eyes rolled back, and it fell with a ponderous thud. It was after watching Izuku flip nimbly off the villain's back that Ochako's stomach remembered that it got shot through the sky with a laser at 0G after she negated 300 kilograms worth of people, which, incidentally, was her new least favorite type of nausea. Once she was done throwing up, it was to find Midoriya in the hands of a villain, his face falling apart in the villain's grasp. This time, she felt too frightened for nausea. Koda never thought of himself as a coward. Sure, he preferred to avoid any and all human interaction, especially if it involved him speaking anything above a hoarse whisper. Yes, insects terrified him. Anyone who wasn't terrified of some creepy, crawly bug with way too many legs that made a sickening crunching sound when stepped on was clearly out of their mind. Everyone had a phobia or 2 of their own, so Koda never understood why the other kids in his school had treated him like glass. Fear was normal. Fear was what kept you alive. Fear was what had him sprinting down a hill dotted by buried buildings as a villain howled and hooted in delight, brandishing knives as his scorpion's tail waved in the air. "I'm going to slice you into pretty, pretty little ribbons," the villain said, cackling as he sprinted towards Koda. Koda dove into a ditch, hoping to lose the villain, only to run headfirst into a soft, bouncy cushion of air. Falling forward, Koda reached out with his arms, trying to break his fall. His hands found something smooth and soft. He squeezed, trying to figure out why he couldn't see what he was holding. "Could you stop squeezing, please?" a strained, high-pitched voice asked. As Kota scrambled back, his brain processed everything at once. 1. The squishy wall of air he ran into was in fact his classmate Hagakure. 2. Said classmate, judging by the fact he couldn't see her at all, wasn't wearing any clothes. Yue definitely couldn't make her costume soon enough. And 3. There were only a handful of places he could have squeezed that would have felt so round and squishy, and Kota definitely didn't want to know which it was. His hands were shaking as he made the signs of apology. Too quickly at first, but then slowly, enough for Hagakure to understand. If he made it out of there alive, the first thing he'd do is thank Midoriya for teaching half the class basic sign language. It's okay, I should have been more careful, Hagakure said. I took off all my clothes because there were too many villains around. I managed to get away. What about you? On cue, the villain leapt into the ravine. Peekaboo, I see you. He cackled maniacally and ground his blades together. Now let's play. Kota let out an undignified whimper of terror and scurried back. The villain watched him struggle back until his back hit the end of the ditch. Come on, aren't you going to stand up? It's no fun if you don't struggle. He licked the blade, watching Kota with wide, crazed eyes as he strode closer. Kota's mouth worked silently. He could hear the bugs in the dirt around him. Not as many as would normally be around outside, but enough at least to distract the villain. The words wouldn't come. Watching the segmented, barbed tail waving in the air, Kota gasped for air, throat tightening as the villain came closer. A rock floated next to the villain. It slammed into the villain's head, knocking them aside. The villain lashed out with both blades in the tail, but all 3 sharp edges struck nothing. Ah, the invisibility quirk, the villain said. No need to be shy, Uncle Tyrion just wants to play. The villain stopped, glancing side to side with a manic grin. The ditch grew deathly silent. Kota held his breath, unable to move as the tension of the scene rose to unbearable levels. A rock shifted. The villain lashed out with a knife. Flecks of blood splashed out from nowhere, coating the rocks of the ravine. Found you, the villain crooned. He flicked the blood off his knife and walked towards Hagakure. Why don't you show me more of you? You're a very lovely color underneath the invisibility. As the knife rose, Kota screamed. The bugs answered, boiling out of the ground. Centipedes, beetles, and spiders swarmed over the villain. Absorbed in the thrill of the chase, the villain didn't notice at first. Once the insects made it up to his neck, they started biting him. Arms, legs, face, anything not covered with skin-tight clothing felt the wrath of Kota's swarm. The villain screeched and dropped the knife, swatting at his skin, crushing insects in ones and twos as dozens more crawled up his ankles. With another rock, Hagakure knocked the villain unconscious. The bugs skittered away as the villain fell. Thanks for that, Kota-kun, Hagakure said in an uneasy tone. If we're ever fighting against each other in class, please don't do that. Kota nodded and suggested in signs that they head towards the center, like Midoriya said before the shadows swallowed him. They found Sato further down the cliff, popping Midoriya's candies in his mouth as he broke a villain's nose. Cuts and burns covered his costume, and one eye was swollen shut. The insects, which had been following behind Kota, broke off to harass the villains. As half their number fell screaming under the arthropod assault, Sato rallied, slamming through the rest of the villains to reach the center. They arrived just in time to watch a villain spatter the ground with Midoriya's blood. The void had been the kind of cold that could only be described as an absence of warmth, chilly to both of Todoroki's halves. The chill that followed was felt only by his mother's half. The mountain zone was an enclosed space with a simulated blizzard. Snow fell in a violent swirl of white, blotting out the view of the dome above. The occasional tree dotted the wintry landscape, branches sagging under the weight of snow. A green mound, poking out from the white expanse, caught Shoto's eye. He staggered towards it, stumbling through the snow on hidden rocks. Basui, half buried and shivering, looked blearily up at him. So CC cold, she said through chattering teeth. She clung to his left side like a life preserver. Let go. We need to get out of here. Cold-blooded, she stammered. Can't stay awake. Have to get warm. Shoto swore under his breath. He looked around, hunting for the exit, but all he saw were cloaked shapes coming towards them. One spotted him, and the rest moved to surround him. Their ringleader, an amber-eyed woman with black hair, smiled as she saw the 2 students huddled together. Awa, trying to stay warm. She sneered. How cute. Here, let me help with that. Molten glass dripped from her eyes, so hot it glowed with incandescent light. At her fingers, the glass hardened into tiny, sharp blades. A flick of her fingers sent them towards Shoto. He stomped on the snow-covered stone, and a wall of ice rose to catch the blades inches from his face. The ice sputtered and cracked as the superheated glass shattered. Shoto sent more ice after the villains, catching a few, but most nimbly stepped aside, or ignored his attacks entirely with heat-based quirks. There's supposed to be 3 of them, the woman said. Backups, find the last kid. Green hair, quirkless, feel free to kill him when you see him. A few villains chuckled as they peeled away from the fight. Shoto sent a column of ice after them, but the woman swept a curtain of glass in the way. Steam hissed as the 2 attacks met. Shirajiri warned us you would be a tricky one, the woman said. but sooner or later you'll both freeze to death. Shoto glanced at Asui. Her lips were turning blue, and her breathing was shallow. Her grip slackened around his arm. As panic set in, he heard Midoriya's words coming back to him, warning him, telling him to use his fire. Shoto shut it out. He wouldn't be his father, no matter what. He wouldn't use his fire. Molten glass bled into the shape of a bow. The villain drew it back. Glass shaped itself into an arrow, knocking itself on the slender glass string. Shoto made a giant wall, wincing as the cold bit into his right side. The arrow plunged into his wall, heating the ice with enough force to blast it apart. Shoto raised his right hand, straining to make another wall. His fingers were coated in frost, the flesh turning black, and his arm was red and throbbing from the cold. Done already? The woman asked as she drew a second arrow. Pity, I was just getting warmed up. Shoto gritted his teeth, pushing himself even further for another burst of ice. As he tried to stand, Asui slipped off his arm. She didn't move as she lay in the snow. Awa, is the little froggy dead already? Don't worry, you'll be joining her soon. As Shoto stared down at Asui, horrified from watching her succumb to the cold, he felt himself snap. White-hot pain filled his chest, and tears boiled on his cheeks. Midoriya's words bounced off his skull. Use your fire, surrounded by villains. Somewhere warmer, freezing to death, use your fire. The words became a chant. Use your fire, use your fire, use your fire, pounding and pounding, demanding to be heard. The arrow shot at his forehead. A torrent of fire met it, knocking it aside with a violent gust of air. The fire raced outwards, consuming the villain, reducing her to ash and bone in the blink of an eye. She didn't have time to scream. Snow melted into wisps of steam, forming a misty circle that expanded with Shoto's fire. Villains ran, stumbled, scurried away in their panic to escape the flames. Shoto flung out his arm, and a second wall rose in front of them, blocking their escape. Howls of agony echoed in the mountain zone's dome as the fire closed in, consuming them one by one. Once it was over, the snow was gone. Bare rock and blackened tree stumps dotted the steaming landscape. Asui lay in a pool of water, still not moving. Shoto grasped her with fumbling hands and drew her onto his lap. He radiated heat, the air around him shimmered, and his arm thawed, exposing frost-bitten fingers. Hey, Shoto said softly. Wake up, please. Asui didn't respond. Another batch of tears filled Shoto's eyes as he hugged her tightly, squeezing more warmth into her lifeless limbs. I'm sorry, Shoto whispered as he sobbed into his shoulder. I should have listened to him. I'm so sorry. The void was nothing new to Tsuyu. One time, she had wandered off from her parents and snuck into a restaurant kitchen, enticed by the sounds of sizzling meat and chatting cooks. Curiosity drew her to the walk-in refrigerator in the back, and a numbing chill in her limbs kept her there. She woke up 20 minutes later in her mother's arms, tears dripping on her shirt as her mother smiled down at her. The void was much like the final moment of limbo as the world fell away. With her still conscious but unable to see the world, unable to move, unable to escape or resist the encroaching darkness. What was new was the sudden, jarring transition to freezing cold. Her limbs grew heavy as the cold set in. She tried to rise, but the snow weighed her down. The void crept back as her body warmth seeped into the snow. Warm hands pulled her from the snow. On instinct, she clung to the warmth, soaking in the body heat. She could barely mumble an explanation of what was happening to her as her rescuer trudged through the snow. Tsuyu heard more voices, but they were muffled, foggy from the cold tickling her brain. She fought off her torpor, struggled to stay awake long enough to find warmth, but the hand she clung to grew colder. The chill around her crept deeper into her chest as walls of ice rose and fell. When she woke up, the snow was gone. Steam curled from her soaked hero outfit. Senses returned in waves, first prickling heat in her extremities, followed by the smell of ash and moisture. The ringing in her ears faded, revealing muffled sobs. A gray dome grew into focus as she blinked her eyes. Snowflakes drifted on the wind and turned to puffs of steam when they got too close to the ground. Tsuyu groaned and stirred. Her eyes met Todoroki's. He stared down at her, disbelief plain on his tear-streaked face. I thought you died, Todoroki said hoarsely. He sniffled as he wiped his tears away. I went into hibernation, Kiro. Takes a while for me to wake up. Todoroki hugged her tightly. Tsuyu squeaked from the sudden contact. I'm so sorry, Todoroki said. You almost died because of me. I promised not to, but I had to, and I almost didn't. Well, I'm not dead. Tsuyu, still numb from waking up and shocked by Todoroki's out-of-character closeness, floundered for a way to change the subject. We should meet up with the others, like Midoriya said. Todoroki stiffly released her and helped her back onto her feet. As they walked down the mountain, Tsuyu stumbled on a loose rock and fell. Another rock, now inches from her face, had eye sockets. A look around revealed a charred skeleton, sans its head, lying as though it had been trying to crawl away to safety. What happened here? Tsuyu asked. Todoroki gazed at the bones. I promised not to use it, he said with a shaking voice. I promised. Tsuyu swallowed, suddenly understanding what had happened. She looked around and found more bones scattered across the bare mountain, blackened by Todoroki's fire. She looked back at Todoroki's haunted face, his eyes transfixed as he stared at what he had done. On impulse, Tsuyu hugged Todoroki. He flinched as she wrapped her arms around him. "It's okay," she said. "Let's just get out of here before more show up." Todoroki nodded and let her lead him to the mountain zone's exit. Tsuyu tried not to look at the bones, tried not to think of what might have happened if Todoroki hadn't burned them all, tried not to imagine their screams, tried not to wonder why Todoroki, distant, quiet, emotionally dead Todoroki, was crying over her. They made it out just in time to see a hand reach for Midoriya from the swirling void. When the void swallowed Katsuki, he responded the same way he would with anything ominous, threatening, or annoying, blasting the ever-living shit out of it until his palms stung. The void, being a metaphysical vacuum, suffered no damage as a result of the outburst, which naturally made Katsuki even angrier. He had a finger on the pin of his grenade gauntlet, ready to nuke the swirling purple void to Kingdom Come, when it deposited him in a giant puddle amidst a torrential downpour, raising Katsuki's anger level to biblical proportions. Unfortunately for one surprised villain with an iguana's facial features, they became the new outlet for Katsuki's pent-up fury. Leaving the smoldering, half-dead villain in his wake, Katsuki followed the hysterical screams until he found Mainta and Kaminari, backed against a building as 5 villains swarmed them. Katsuki detonated his palms, flying forward to kick a villain in the chin. "The exploding one's here," a villain shouted. "Have everyone surround them." Katsuki grabbed his face. He ignited his sweat, but all he got was a pathetic pop. The villain grabbed him by the wrist and shoved him aside. "Not so tough here, are you?" the villain sneered. "Have fun trying to blow things up when your hands are wet." Katsuki stared in rage at his soaked gloves. He tore one off with his teeth and rubbed furiously, trying to dry and heat his hands, but the rain washed away his efforts. "What do we do?" Mainta cried. "They're going to kill us." "Use your quirk, dumb, just use your quirk." Katsuki snapped. "Oh yeah, great plan. I'll just cover them in sticky balls until my head bleeds. That'll stop them from smashing our heads in." Mainta pointed at the sidewalk, which was already dotted with purple spheres. "In case you noticed, they aren't doing much." "I could shock them all," Kaminari said. "It'd be really easy in this rain." "Yeah, but we'll all be fried to a crisp. And I'll be an idiot, I know." Kaminari and Mainta both looked up at Katsuki. "What do we do?" Katsuki primed a gauntlet and looked around, making the villains back off while he assessed the situation. One villain had stepped on a ball, trapping his foot against the sidewalk. "Your spheres still stick in this rain?" Katsuki asked. "Why yeah, they're hydrophobic." Mainta grinned hysterically at him. "That idiot tried kicking one, thinking the rain would keep it from sticking." "Hydro what?" Kaminari asked. "Are they insulators too?" Mainta became thoughtful, then grinned. "They're like rubber, so yeah." "I swear you two are making up words. How do you not know what an insulator is?" Katsuki snapped at him. "Your whole quirk is electricity." "Guys, are we doing this or not?" Mainta asked. "I'd like to not die, thanks." Katsuki stepped on 2 of the balls. He wobbled back and forth, flailing his arms to keep his balance. "Pikachu, used to charge when we're both standing on these balls." "Hey, who are you calling Pikachu?" Mainta made a small pile and sat on it. "Just do it." "All right, but this better work." The villain's eyes widened as Kaminari fired off his quirk. Arcs of electricity leapt across the ground, skirting around Mainta's rubbery balls to shock the villains. One had the sense and speed to climb atop Mainta's balls, only for Katsuki to knock him unconscious once Mainta freed him. "That all of them?" Katsuki asked as he examined the fallen villains. It better be." Mainta anxiously looked around, as if a villain might crash through the walls at any moment. Kaminari walked around in a daze, giving thumbs up to a lamp post and mumbling to himself. One of the villains, a tall, dark-skinned, muscular man with messy brown hair, stood up, shaking drops of water off his coat. Arcs of electricity rippled across his arms. "You actually went through with it. Reckless children. Still, I'm impressed you came up with a way to stay standing after the discharge." Mainta shrieked and hid behind Katsuki. Katsuki sneered and primed one of his gauntlets. "If you knew what was good for you, you would have stayed down. Now I'm going to kill you." The man frowned. "Death threats from a Hero Corps student. As if I needed any more evidence of how backwards Hero Society has become." Katsuki aimed at the villain and pulled a pin. "Like I care what a villain like you thinks, now die." The villain was swallowed up in a massive cloud of smoke. When it vanished, he was still standing, albeit with a singed hole in his leather jacket. "You know," the villain said as he strode towards Katsuki, "I tried to be a hero when I was your age. You didn't think much of a kid who needed to haul around 3 car batteries just to punch a robot. Instead, they liked kids like Endeavor, kids with bright, flashy quirks who could burn anyone who was a problem to a crisp. Katsuki backed away and readied another gauntlet, but the villain rushed forward and grabbed his wrist. Katsuki struggled and even bit him, getting a numb tongue for his trouble. "I don't want to kill kids," the villain said, "but knowing what you'll become someday, just another endeavor burning the masses into compliance, I'm willing to make an exception." "Fuck you," Katsuki roared. The villain looked at him sadly and raised a fist. "Didn't anyone tell you that heroes don't swear?" Katsuki stared dumbfounded as the fist crashed towards him. At the last moment, one of Minda's purple spheres slipped in front of the punch. The punch still rattled Katsuki's skull, but it kept him from snapping his neck. The villain shook his hand, trying in vain to dislodge the sphere. "Clearly, our intelligence was off. We'll have to make sure this doesn't happen again." Minda grabbed the sphere, releasing Katsuki, and threw 2 more at the villain. They stuck to his chest, but the villain was careful not to touch them. "What are you doing?" Katsuki said as Minda ran away. "Keep throwing." "I can't." Minda pointed at his forehead. Blood trickled down past his eyes. "I only have a few left, and they aren't even doing anything." The villain watched them head down the alley and turned his attention to Kaminari, who was trying to high-five his reflection in a store window. "You're not going to leave your friend behind, are you? Some hero you are." Katsuki stopped in his tracks and snarled. "Minda, give me one." "Wait, what? I have a plan, just shut up and do it." "Oh, you're coming back to fight?" the villain asked. "Do you still think you can win against me? Your friend had quite a bit of electricity in him. I could level this whole block if I wanted to." "We'll see about that." Katsuki primed his other gauntlet, pulled the pin, and pressed Minda's sphere into the opening. "Eat this, sticky grenade." With a deafening roar, the nitroglycerin detonated. The sphere flew apart in a burst of purple goo, drenching the villain and Kaminari in viscous, rubbery liquid. The villain pulled and struggled, but the goo held him fast to the ground. The more he struggled, the tighter the goo clung to him, until he was hunched over. While Minda dug Kaminari out of the goo, Katsuki strode up to the fallen victim. "That's what you get for being a villain. I'll beat any of you, anytime, anywhere." "This isn't over," the villain growled. "I won't let people like you become heroes. You don't deserve it." Katsuki scowled. He planted his foot on the villain's face, taking care not to touch the goo, and drove his head into the ground. The villain gasped, curling to keep his nose and mouth just above the water. Minda stared at Katsuki with a nervous expression. Katsuki kicked water into the villain's face and turned away. "Let's get out of this stupid rain. There's more villains to kill." As it happened, there was only one villain left in the center plaza. He had his hand on Deku's face, with one finger poised over his forehead. Deku's eyes met Katsuki's at the last moment. His serene expression brought back memories months old, memories Katsuki had angrily shoved aside. Telling himself it didn't matter, he was still worthless, someone as pathetic as Deku couldn't have possibly saved him. The finger fell. Deku's skin flaked away, then the muscle underneath, then the bone. Blood gushed from the wound, staining the hand and running down Deku's face. All the while, Deku kept smiling that calm, quiet smile that set Katsuki's soul on fire. Izuku examined the last commission he saw himself take. 100,000 yen offer from Midnight Lover 69, by far the most amount of money he'd ever been offered at one time. They had asked for an explicit image of Midnight, very politely, understanding he usually made a rule of not doing explicit art and making it clear they wouldn't be mad if he didn't accept. He used a local coffee shop, a favorite haunt of his anytime he needed a caffeine boost to finish a round of commissions, as the backdrop. Midnight usually taught in her hero outfit and never made any appearances in casual wear, so Izuku had to get inventive, putting the R-rated hero in a long-sleeved gray shirt and letting her hair hang loose. Gone was her usual sexy smirk, replaced with a soft smile and distant, distracted stare. Izuku spent an inordinate amount of care on the image, from the texture of the table she sat at, to a curl of steam rising from the mug she held. Sunlight slanted in through the window, casting Midnight in a soft glow that lit up her features. He even added people in the background, leaving their features indistinct, yet adding enough detail to make them feel alive. When he was done, he stopped to admire his magnus opum. It showed Midnight, not as a hero, but as Kayama Nimuri, drawing out a soft and sensitive character that Izuku wouldn't have believed had existed before he made this piece. He typed out a message to the patron, explaining how he couldn't accept their commission, explaining how heroes were people as well and he didn't feel comfortable exposing them in such a fashion, and instead offered this image free of charge. Midnight got Izuku's message an hour later. The image, and the love with which it was crafted, brought tears to her eyes. She went to his and donated twice as much as she had promised, exactly as Izuku foresaw. Ever since he had found his quirk, commission by commission, with a steady drip of subscribers after the site got off the ground, Izuku had squirreled away a small fortune in his personal bank account. The account number and password were tucked under his laptop, where his mom would hopefully find it. He knew it wouldn't be any consolation to her, but it would at least mean she could quit one of her jobs or afford a nicer apartment. His last week had flown by, assuming his quirk wouldn't be wrong a second time. Maybe near-death experiences messed with it. Maybe All Might had done something. All Might wasn't going to be there this time. He saw the collection of heroes that will arrive to save the students, and All Might wasn't one of them. The villain that would kill him this time would have all the time he needed to disintegrate him. Even if he did live, against all odds and the promise of his quirk, he'd just quietly put away the bank deposit slip he left for his mom and keep saving people however he could. It had been an unremarkable week, as far as weeks went. More classes, more training, more pushing himself until he could barely stand, rushing to make his body ready for the villain attack. Ajiro practiced with his bola, Ashido tried out with her new gauntlets, Uraraka figured out how to dampen her quirk's effects to use it longer, and Bakugo spent his lunches sitting gloomily with Minta and Kaminari. When the press had broken in, Izuku asked Yaoyorozu for a megaphone and calmed down the panicked students. Ada had insisted on renouncing his position as class rep, citing how Izuku had stayed calm in a crisis. Izuku insisted on a revote. More than half the class made him the new rep. It was an uncomfortable position for him, acting as class leader, but if it made his fellow students look to him in the coming crisis, it was an easy burden to accept. The next day, he had used the megaphone to ask Yaoyorozu if she could make equipment with Jiru. With Jiru sitting next to her, a seating arrangement Izuku had set up ahead of time, Yaoyorozu reluctantly took Jiru's measurements for her earphone jacks. He exposed Takoyami's weakness and encouraged him to tell others, explaining how his and their lives might depend on knowing how his quirk worked. He taught a few interested students, including Hagakure, sign language with Koda. He used every moment, every conversation, to steer them towards safety at the USJ. And now, Izuku watched them board the bus to the USJ, knowing that they would be fighting for their lives in less than 30 minutes, and not able to say a word about it. Part of him railed against it. Part of him screamed to take Aizawa aside and tell him everything he knew. But the familiar sensation of vertigo gripped him, reminding him the consequences of trying to change his future. Everything would work out as it was supposed to. Before they had left for the USJ, Bakugo had marched up to him, and without meeting his eyes, said he'd done what he had asked. Izuku nodded, said thanks Kaken, and left it at that. Unless his quirk screwed up again, it would have been the last conversation they will ever have. He hoped Kaken would take his words to heart and be the hero he never could. Izuku met up with a couple other classmates before getting on the bus. He gave Sato a box of homemade sweets, packed with sugar and portioned to last through the villain attack. For Hanta, he had a bottle of moisturizer, suggesting that it would help keep his skin from drying out from quirk use. He had energy bars as well, but those he kept in airtight bags in his pockets. A low, excited buzz filled the bus ride over to the USJ. Classmates guessed at what kind of rescue work they'd be doing. Uraraka gushed over meeting 13, and Bakugo glared at Izuku in stony silence, flanked by an excited Kaminari and Minta. Ida tried to restore order, going so far as to stand and reprimand the class for their noisy behavior, but the moment he spotted Izuku, he fell silent and sat back down. 13 met them at the entrance to the building. After they took Aizawa aside, he announced to them that All Might wouldn't be able to make it, just as Izuku knew would happen. Izuku pointed out the swirling vortex in the plaza as it started, giving Aizawa an extra precious few seconds to react. He warned 13 against using her black hole quirk, keeping her from making a fatal mistake against a warp quirk user. He shouted for everyone to meet up at the center plaza, gathering them so he would know they were all safe before he died, before tackling Mina as the black mist overtook them all. Izuku tucked his legs as he fell, landing in the water with a huge splash. He broke the surface quickly, drew the 2 grappling pistols Hatsum had made him, and fired both at the boat. "Grab on," he shouted at Mina. She wrapped her arms around him as he reeled in the grappling guns, dragging them both to the side of the boat. His arms stung from their combined weight as he climbed the side of the boat. Once they were up, Izuku grabbed Yaoyorozu and Jiru first, pulling them by their backs. Mina helped him pull them up, just before a hydrokinetic villain could slash at them. Ada had made it to the back of the boat himself, and Izuku sent Jiru to help him up. Kirishima was still floundering in the water, weighed down by his hardened skin, as a villain with shark teeth bit at him from all sides. Bits of broken teeth floated in the water, but the villain kept growing more, and blood leaked into the water from tiny cuts in Kirishima's armor. Izuku grabbed him with both grapples. Mina and Yaoyorozu hauled him up with them, while Izuku told him to only harden his legs. With his weight reduced, they were able to pull him up. Villains circled the boat, watching them from the water. The students stood in a circle on deck, catching their breath. Yaoyorozu looked around, shivering either from the cold or the danger. "We should get this boat moving. Kirishima, could you check below for the engine?" "There isn't one," Izuku cut in. "It's just a prop for the simulations." "Mina, could you cut away the top half of the boat with your acid? We need to make it lighter so we can push it back." Despite the situation, Mina smiled and saluted him. Aye aye, Captain. Kirishima, go with her, cut off the pieces she weakens. Kirishima pounded on his chest with a toughened hand. Sweet, let's do this. Ieyasu looked at the villains in the water and asked, what are we going to do about them? They're not going to let us go. Jiru wrung water out of her hair. Give me a sec. I'll use my speakers to blow them away. Are they waterproof? Izuku asked. Jiru looked down at her legs. Water sloshed around inside the speakers in her suit. Shit, didn't think of that. Any ideas? Ieyasu was about to make her own suggestion, but Izuku cut her off. Ieyasu-san, could you make a replacement? Something handheld that we could aim would be great. Frowning in concentration, Ieyasu formed a device like a megaphone. A villain, growing impatient watching them stand on the boat, formed a clawed hand from the surrounding water. Jiru plugged a jack into the sonic device's port, aimed it at the villain, and let loose a powerful blast. The villain dove underwater, clutching their ears, and the watery construct fell apart. Great, Izuku said. Keep them off us while we help cut the boat to size. Once it's smaller, we can row it back to shore. Ieyasu-san, stay with her, and deploy flashbangs if any get too close. Don't make too much, we may need more items later on. Ieyasu nodded and stood next to Jiru, pointing out villains for her to blast. Wary of the sonic shockwaves, the villains backed off, gathering in a group to discuss their next move. Meanwhile, Izuku and Ida helped haul boat scraps overboard, while Ashido melted more holes and Kirishima cut through weakened sections with his hands. The boat tipped as they cut it down to size, forcing them to work their way around multiple times to get it down to just the bottom hull. It was too wide and flat for a normal boat, with nowhere to sit, but it held the 6 of them and moved well enough as Kirishima paddled with a makeshift oar. Ieyasu had volunteered to make a real set of paddles, but Izuku had pointed out it would waste her lipid reserves. Emboldened by the shrunken size of the boat, the villains converged on their position. Kirishima rowed faster, but their clumsy craft couldn't outpace the dozen villains after them. Ida-san, Izuku said, can you activate your engines underwater? I could, Ida said, but I would have to be careful not to flood them. Kirishima looked back and grinned. Dude, are we turning this thing into a speedboat? Are you sure that's safe? Ieyasu asked. What if we capsize? The villains are catching up to us anyways, Jiru said as she blasted another villain out of the water, and they're too spread out for me to get them all. Just do it. All right, hold on everyone. Izuku and Ashido held Ida's arms as he lowered his legs into the water. As his engines revved up, the boat shot forward, kicking up waves in its wake. A few villains matched the new pace, but Jiru forced each of them back before they could do any damage. When the boat hit the shore, it bucked up, tossing everyone over the side. Izuku landed nimbly on his feet, grappling guns drawn, while the rest fell on their backs and sides. Kirishima was the first to his feet, skin hardened, looking around for signs of villains. The shore was quiet, but within a couple 100 feet, a battle raged at the center plaza as 24 villains surrounded Eraserhead and 13. Aizawa darted through the group of villains, using his capture scarf to subdue 3 at a time. But 13, forced to fight without their black hole, could only block and dodge as a villain slashed at them with dagger-like claws. Sweet, we made it back. Now what? We need to get someone back to UA, Izuku said. We won't be able to find the one cutting communications, so we'll need to send someone to warn them in person. Ida-san, we need you to run back to campus and warn the heroes, and leave you all behind. How could I? Class rep's orders, Izuku said. We can hold out until help arrives. Ada grimaced, but he saluted and said, yes sir. I will send for help as soon as possible. Jiru-san, Ieyasu-san, go with him. Use the sonic gun and flashbangs to keep the warp quirk villain off him. Aizawa-sensei has the rest of the villains bottled up at the plaza, so you shouldn't run into trouble. He fished the energy bars out of his pocket and handed them to Ieyasu. Use those to recharge your quirk on the way. What about you guys? Jiru asked. We'll help the teachers from here, Izuku said, gesturing to himself, Ashido, and Kirishima. That's too dangerous, Ieyasu said. Those are real villains, and we're just freshman students. We have the tools to keep them at a distance, Izuku said. If Aizawa falls, the villains will be free to pick us off group by group. We have to make sure he lasts long enough for help to arrive. But, Ieyasu-san, Izuku said, putting more weight and volume into his voice than he would ever normally feel comfortable with, we need to get more heroes, and we need to make sure Aizawa-sensei holds out until they get here. I know splitting up isn't wise, but there's no time to argue. At first, Ieyasu looked as though she wanted to argue further, but as she watched the battle, saw Aizawa and 13 slowly but surely overwhelmed by sheer numbers, she buckled. Okay, please don't do anything reckless. Make a flashbang for me, in case we need it. Save as much of your quirk as possible. We'll need medical supplies after this. Ieyasu swallowed nervously and handed Izuku a Matryoshka doll. Pins on top of the head. Just be safe. Okay, I will. Just get moving. As Ida left with his escort, Izuku turned towards the plaza. Ashido-san, spread acid out in front of us. Make it weak, but very slippery. Kirishima, take point. If anyone tries to get through the acid, take them out. Kirishima's skin turned jagged and solid. He gave Izuku a toothy grin and said, "You can count on me." Mina spread the acid in a wide cone in front of them. Maybe I should get a squirt gun. Then I could get in on the long-range combat too. The accuracy would be very poor at this range, Izuku said. You'd probably hit the teachers. Mina nodded. Then what else can I do? See that big black one hanging in the back? Izuku asked. Two figures watched the fray. Shigaraki, a lanky, blue-haired man covered in hands, and the hulking, black Namu with its brain sticking out. Shigaraki watched in avid interest, scratching at his neck as wave after wave of villains fell. The Namu watched unblinking, still as a statue, waiting for orders. You're seriously not thinking about taking it on, are you? I don't think we'll have a choice. That villain's their trump card, what they're keeping in reserve until All Might shows up. But if their attack fails, they'll probably try to kill a few of us before they leave. Mina grew pale as she studied the monster. So, you're saying that thing's going to come after us? If that thing can stand up to All Might, there won't be anything Kirishima or I could do to damage it, but your acid might. It's built to take punches, not chemical burns. Mina looked at the gauntlets on her costume, a recent addition to hold large quantities of acid in reserve. I have a bit stored up. Should I add more? Make it as strong as you can. With a nervous expression, Mina asked, Are you sure? My strongest acid isn't exactly safe. Izuku put both hands on her shoulders. I'd rather not. But if that thing comes after us, your acid is the only thing that can keep us safe. After taking a second look at the Namu, Mina took a deep breath and said, Okay. But only if they come after us. The strongest stuff I can make would kill them. I'm trusting you to do the right thing with it, all right. Izuku met her black, worried eyes and nodded. It's a last resort. I'll let you know when we need to use it. Izuku waited another minute, fingers steady over the triggers of his grappling guns, between the canisters in his guns and the two waiting on his belt next to the flashbang. He had a total of 34 shots left. He will need every single one. When a knife flashed towards 13's suit, Izuku fired, snagging the villain's arm, and yanked back hard enough to topple them over. Izuku's next shot caught an ankle, tripping a villain before they could wrap their crystalline arms around Aizawa. Shots 3 and 4 each grabbed a head. When Izuku pulled back hard with both hands, their heads collided, knocking them both to the floor. Izuku's interference was minimal, but enough to keep the pressure off the two teachers. The villains took notice, and a few broke off to deal with him. Most slipped. The one villain that kept their footing over Mina's acid field got clocked by Kirishima's hardened punch. Mina gave him a solemn, wordless nod when she had filled up her gauntlets. Izuku switched out air canisters and fired more shots to tangle up a small group of villains. 13, cut and bleeding from multiple scratch wounds on their front, was steadily retreating towards the swat of acid, hoping to fight with their back against it, while Aizawa covered them. The villains, ragged and bloodied but still fighting hard, pressed closer and closer to the beleaguered teacher, as if sensing their imminent defeat. The villains rushed him all at once in a desperate last gambit. Aizawa unfurled his capture scarf, weaving it into a loose sphere around him, before mashing it together, catching every villain in a tight ball of fabric. With 13's help, he hurled the sphere of villains into the air, flinging them towards the lake. Izuku had 5 shots left. The first 2 clung to Aizawa's back, yanking him onto the acid as the Namu struck. The glancing blow broke Aizawa's arm and left a meter-wide crater in the ground. He slid to Kirishima, who helped him onto his feet. The blue-haired villain wasn't far behind his Namu. Disappointing. Maybe I should invest more points into dexterity. Strength alone isn't any good if you can't hit the enemy, right? Aizawa shoved Kirishima aside and used his quirk on the Namu. The monster ran forward, plowing through Mina's acid. Izuku pulled Aizawa again. The monster's enormous hand clipped Aizawa's face, breaking his nose and shattering his goggles. Damn, it's no use, Aizawa muttered. He turned to Izuku and Ashido and said, Get out of here. I'll hold off the villain. You would die, Izuku said. We won't let that happen. Aizawa scowled. Don't be foolish. This thing's beyond any of you. You should listen to your teacher, Shigaraki said. Run away, small fry. The XP I get simply wouldn't be worth the trouble. Izuku gave Mina a firm nod and said, Even if we ran, it would catch us. We have to fight. Shigaraki grinned. You really think you have a chance? This isn't some scripted loss, you know. You die here, it's game over. Izuku fired his 3rd shot at the Namu's face, covering both its eyes with clingy black tendrils. While it was distracted with clawing the sticky strands off its face, Izuku shouted, Mina-san, now. Acid gushed out of Mina's gauntlets. The viscous, cream-colored mixture smoked and bubbled as it ran across the Namu's skin. The monster howled. Its flesh writhed as its regeneration rebuilt the burned flesh as quickly as the acid ate through it. Its eyes were burned away, and acid seeped into its brain. Though the neural tissue repaired more slowly, the acid wasn't causing more than surface damage. What the hell? Mina asked. It's super strong, and it can heal. It also has shock absorption, Shigaraki said gleefully. All Might could punch it all day and not leave a scratch. Even your acid can't defeat it. Izuku pointed at the Namu's head and shouted at Kirishima, give me a boost. Kirishima, at first gaping in dismay, locked eyes with Izuku and smiled. Sounds like you have another crazy plan. Let's do this, plus ultra. With hardened skin, Kirishima stood in front of the rampaging Namu, hands cupped below his waist. With flashbang in hand, Izuku sprinted up to him, planted a foot in his hands, and leapt as Kirishima heaved him upwards. As Izuku became airborne, one of the Namu's arms slammed into Kirishima's side, snapping his armored skin and sending him airborne. He hit the ground with a strangled cry, clutching a twisted arm. While airborne, Izuku pulled the pin on the flashbang with his teeth. As he vaulted over the monster's head, he flung the flashbang at the acrid, fuming mess of brain tissue. The grenade sank out of sight. When Izuku hit the ground, the flashbang went off with a muffled pop. It left no visible damage, but the creature fell to its knees. Its flesh kept repairing itself, but the creature no longer moved. Shigaraki stared at the felled Namu. His eyes twitched, and behind the hand covering his face, a visage of palpable fury twisted his chapped, flaky features. That was supposed to tank the final boss, and it got critted by some low-level cannon fodder. What kind of bullshit game is this? Aizawa, clutching his broken arm, stood in front of Izuku. Give up quietly, and the police can be lenient. Give up. Now why would I do that? Sure, I can't kill All Might, but I can still defeat him. Shigaraki ran towards Mina, arm outstretched. Mina flung acid at him, but as it touched his skin, the viscous liquid dissolved into gray dust, blowing away in Shigaraki's wake. Izuku fired his penultimate shot at the villain. When he pulled, the hand covering Shigaraki's face came with it. Got your nose, Izuku said. His stomach twisted itself in knots over those words. But he knew he had to goad the villain into attacking him. The other students would never be able to dodge him. Even Izuku, knowing every move the villain would make, couldn't dodge him forever. Shigaraki clutched at his exposed face. Nervous muttering hissed through gritted teeth as the villain apologized to his father. He glared at Izuku, madness and fury in his crimson eyes as he screamed, "You'll die for taking father from me." Aizawa confronted Shigaraki, but he grabbed the pro-hero by the broken arm. Aizawa blinked in the pain, giving Shigaraki the window he needed to dissolve half of Aizawa's elbow. Bleeding profusely, Aizawa sank to the ground. Mina ran to help him up. Without having missed a step, Shigaraki rushed at Izuku. His hands darted like snakes, each finger a fang hoping to sink its decaying poison into Izuku's skin. An unnerving calm came over Izuku. The whole world slipped away, leaving only the moment after the present. Each twitch of muscle came of its own accord as Izuku danced on the strings of his preordained fate. He ducked and weaved around Shigaraki's wild, groping attacks. Izuku wove like air, dodging the fingers of death by a hair's breadth, before darting in, striking a blow to the gut or the exposed face. Each hit, though lacking power, bought him just a little more time. Even with his flawless combat, Shigaraki slowly, inexorably gained on him, growing more cautious, overextending less often, giving Izuku fewer openings. As the minutes wore on, Izuku's strength waned. His legs burned, and his head swam with lightheadedness. Shigaraki's fingers brushed his face guard, turning it to dust. Fingernails scraped long furrows in his arm, just a single nail short of stripping his arm to the bone. After that scratch, Kirishima rushed in. Izuku used the last shot in his grappling gun to snare his ankle, tripping him with a hard yank. As Kirishima fell, his face missed Shigaraki's outstretched hand by an inch. Izuku's arm was overextended from tripping Kirishima. Seeing his opening, Shigaraki darted forward and grabbed his wrist. The villain stopped, thinking he had won. Izuku took advantage of the villain's distraction. Blood went flying as Izuku's fist crashed into Shigaraki's face. Shigaraki looked around, hunting for the reason his quirk failed. When he saw Aizawa, hair floating, glaring at him as Mina clumsily bound up his bleeding arm, Shigaraki laughed and said, "I almost forgot about you. Kurogiri, are you there?" A nebulous, purple form appeared next to him. "Yes, Shigaraki, but I have bad news." One of the students made it out. Shigaraki grabbed Kurogiri by the metal band holding his body together. "You're lucky it doesn't matter, or you'd be dust. Now, do me a favor and make Eraserhead disappear." Aizawa tried to erase Kurogiri's quirk, but he was swallowed up by purple mist. Mina was left clutching bloody rags of Aizawa's costume, looking up at the nebulous villain with palpable fear, while Kirishima was still on his back, struggling to rise without upsetting his twisted arm. "Now that we won't be interrupted," Shigaraki said, "let's continue where we left off." With the battle reset, Izuku once again had the lead, but fatigue set in. Still not used to strenuous activity, Izuku's body refused to move as quickly as it needed to, and while he could compensate with his knowledge of his future, there was only so much he could do before Shigaraki caught him. Fingers grazed him as he backpedaled. A touch on the cheek, a brush on the shoulder, fingers slipping on his elbow, each a reminder that, no matter how hard he tried, Shigaraki would catch him eventually. With that last bit of time he had before Shigaraki recovered, he swept his gaze around the USJ, finding his 19 classmates. Todoroki holding up a sui. Uraraka vomiting as Yaoyorozu rubbed her back, Bakugo soaking wet, Ajiro with an arm under Takoyami's shoulder, Koda leading an army of insects. Last was Ada, panting. Engines smoking, as he opened the doors for UA's staff. Midnight, Present Mike, Cementos, Snipe, Ectoplasm, Vlad King, Recovery Girl, all of them. Izuku blinked. Every teacher really was there, including All Might. It felt like a find the different set of photographs in his mind. Everything perfectly in place except for All Might, at the front, smiling his trademark symbol of peace smile. There in the present vision, ostensibly absent from all account he saw in the future. All Might burned his presence into his vision as future became present. He wasn't supposed to be there, but there he was. He might live after all. The thought didn't give him any comfort. While Izuku was distracted, black fog bubbled up in front of his face. It didn't matter what Izuku did. He knew that the warp quirk would find him no matter how he moved. Shigaraki's hand shot out of the void, gripping Izuku's face with 4 fingers. The fog billowed, revealing the rest of Shigaraki. "They're all safe," Izuku said, smiling. "You failed." Shigaraki sneered. "All but one." The 5th finger fell. The pain Izuku felt was a pale echo of the original experience, the face-rending agony as he received the vision on the bathroom toilet. It still stung, but he held a smile on his face, staring death in the eyes as it claimed him. He had done it. He had saved everyone. He was a hero. He would have only saved one if he had died that first time, but now he had saved 21. It was as much as he could hope for. The pain stopped too early. Izuku looked around, wondering what had just happened. Shigaraki had flown halfway across the plaza, knocked aside by a flick of All Might's finger. Comparing the present to past was just as jarring. 1 second, All Might was with the other heroes. The next, he had an arm wrapped around Izuku and pressed a bandage over his forehead. "You'll pay for this, All Might," Shigaraki roared as the black fog swallowed him, leaving the downed Namu and unconscious villains. He fought the void, reached for All Might, but with a final swirl of fog, Shigaraki and Kirigiri. Izuku was slipping away, darkness creeping into his vision as his blood pressure tanked. Yaoyorozu sprinted over, crumbs of his energy bars on her cheeks, pulling more bandages out of her skin and handing them to All Might with tears in her eyes. Izuku watched the UA faculty secure his classmates, treating cuts and frostbite, before falling unconscious in All Might's arms.